Interstellar travel is now a common occurrence, and technologies have replaced blood and flesh. As long as your head and chest are not damaged, one can keep living for as long as possible. Now, our protagonist, who grew up in the slums, has turned 15 and taken the selection exams to become an Imperial guard. A boy with a gun in his hand stood in front of some men who were raining bullets at him, yet he was unfazed. He's doing it all for the Empire, to get rid of the enemies who pose a threat to the Emperor and the Empire's people, which he deemed to be the only reason why the Imperial Guard exists. Before the bullets could get to him, he swiftly countered the men's bullets with his own bullets, and counterattacked with a clean headshot to their heads, sending them flying to Yama. Confident, he stood with his gun oozing out smoke. Then comes an applause from the shadows as the door opened, to which he walked in. The technology of this future Earth had developed significantly, however, it does not mean hope for humanity. Due to the unending war caused by lack of resources, Earth continued to be destroyed, and humanity kept expanding to other planets. In the end, life on Earth ended, due to an invasion by unknown alien species. However, the survivors of humanity wandered through space and ended up finding a planet similar to Earth after a long journey. So humanity decided to call this new planet Novus, meaning new home. They sent out coordinates of this new home to all of space. With this, all humans who had been scattered throughout space began gathering at Novus, developing into different factions. In Novus, there exists the Bellado Federation, a place where countless alien species are mixed amongst the Earthlings. The Accretion Empire possesses a powerful army of soldiers with mechanized physiques, and the Holy Korite Alliance is made up of priests who possess force energy as well as mental fortitude. However, there were finite resources even on Novus. As a result, humanity once again prepared for war to monopolize resources. Now, in the Accretion Empire, Accretion Machination Lab, the boy walked through the door. The supervisor then told the boy behind him that he's next, saying he has got bad luck on his side since he's going to be a subject of a lot of comparisons with the boy that just came through the door. But he warned him not to forget that this is a very important day for them trainees, since this place is where they're supposed to show His Majesty what they're capable of. The man is Accretia Imperial Guard Commander, Hamilas Custoria. The boy, whose name is Luca, a trainee of the Accretia Imperial Guard, and the protagonist of this story, was speechless for a moment, then told the commander that they'd see who's the unlucky one. The commander, recalling his name Luca, told Luca he should better live up to his expectations. Luca replied, "I will." As he stepped out, he put on his helmet, then thought to himself that he needs to be at least capable of dodging and blocking bullets since it's a necessary skill in order to become an official part of the Imperial Guards. Luca had completed all the simulation training in the most extreme situations. He's a soldier in training of the Imperial Guards with heightened spatial awareness thanks to the senses and perception reinforcement procedure. Now, he stood in front of some angry mobs. The 5 opponents are 5 death row inmates with cheap cybernetic equipment. Confident, he pulled out his weapon, and as the mobs angrily charged towards him, he did the same, certain that it would only take him 10 seconds to take them all down. Swoosh, he passed through the first guy, who only realized he's dead after his head was chopped off. Now going on to the others, they panicked as they looked at Luca as he stood right in their middle, their guns pointed at him. Though Luca is able to take them all down within seconds, this is an opportunity for him to make a good impression on the Emperor, so he decided to do something noteworthy. He then recalled what the previous guy did, wondering if he could do the same since he has never done it before, but he decided to make it happen here. As the mobs panicked, some frightened as they clenched their teeth, eyes filled with despair, Luca was determined to heighten his senses to the maximum, and as soon as they fired the bullets at him, our big guy did something extraordinary, swiftly blocked all the incoming bullets, at the same time counterattacking. Seeing this, the commander grinned, and within the next seconds, Luca stood confident, his body oozing with smoke, then dusted his weapon of its blood as the mob's bodies lay to waste. He exhaled heavily as he bled through his nose since he pushed his body to its limit, but he was happy that he finally surpassed his limit, which would indeed raise his value. The door opened and he walked through it. The commander expressed his disbelief to Luca, saying he didn't think Luca would use ballistic trajectory control since it shouldn't be in the curriculum yet. As Luca cleaned his blood from his mouth, he told the commander that he just copied the guy who went before him. The commander grinned, saying that the guy was from a renowned household, so he was already taught the curriculum in advance. He's different from someone like Luca, who's from an orphanage. Then he told Luca that he likes him, so he would give him a gift. Luca turned around surprised. The commander then placed his hands on Luca's eye. This action immediately drew the hatred of other trainees. The commander grinned again, squeezed Luca's eye, impressed that Luca is not fazed at all since his eye was removed, commented that Luca must have done great on his pain tolerance training, then told Luca again that he likes him. Luca replied that he's glad since it's an eye he would have taken out eventually anyway, and he would like to request for an eye that has the feature to predict trajectory. His words surprised the other guy on the mask. Hours later, a guy came into the room, waved at Luca as he introduced himself as number 12, Ile. He told Luca, number 32, that he wanted to talk to him. Luca looked at Ile speechless, as Ile remarked on the awkward situation, then told Ile to come in. Ile told Luca that he's really good back there. His actions impressed him. Luca replied, calling him young master, then told Ile that he's in the wrong place if he wishes to exchange praises. Ile smiled, saying it looks like it'll be really hard to become Luca's friend. As Luca looked at Ile Karthika, he thought to himself that with just Ile's aura, he could tell that Ile is the son of the famous noble household, Karthika. Logically speaking, there is no need for Luca to be aggressive to someone from a noble household, and the only explanation to his aggression is envy. But he decided his tiredness to be the cause of his aggressiveness. Ile then gave Luca a blue pill, which was the purpose of his visit. The pill will decrease Luca's sensitivity so that he can rest better, but Luca rejected it. With a grin, Ile told Luca he won't be able to train well tomorrow if he doesn't get a good rest. He should be well aware that mental fortitude can't carry him through everything. Luca, speechless for a moment, then took the pill, examined it, and realized that it's different from those knockoffs made in the streets. Luca then told Ilay that he's also pretty good, so he just copied him. Ilay pointed at his eye, telling Luca that he has a mechanical eye for combat, so it's not hard to calculate trajectory, but he deemed Luca's actions to be much more impressive, since he pulled it off with just instincts, and it seemed like the commander took notice of Luca, and irregular for that matter. So Ilay assumed that's why the commander is gifting him a mechanical eye out of his own pocket. Luca casually replied that he just tried really hard throughout the training. With a sharp stare, he added that nobility is excellent while the lower classes are powerless after all, so he can't just let go of a rare opportunity like the trainee session as a lower-class citizen. Ilay, speechless for a moment, then quoted what Luca just said, "Nobility is excellence." He told Luca that he may have passed the selection process, but he should know there are guys who failed it, certain there are also persons who paid money to manipulate results. Luca questioned if that's possible, to which Ilay replied, there is no proof, but it's something he strongly believes. Those like Luca, without any support system, have never failed the advanced soldier cultivation process, because it means that they made it here with just their skill. Luca looked at Ilay, said to himself that he didn't expect to hear a noble tell him that not all nobles are excellent, then paused, wondering what the guy Ilay wants to tell him. With a sharp grin, Ilay stretched out his hand, then told Luca that he thinks people like Luca are the ones who should succeed, so he would be cheering him on. Luca shook his hand, saying he also thought the same, since this is all for the Empire. This story follows the chronicles of a boy being raised as a military weapon in the tyrannical empire, Acretia. Hours later, at the shooting range, Ilay and Luca were targeting a doll. Luca raised his gun, and with his newly implanted eyes he started shooting. The doll came towards him, showing that all his shots were headshots. Ilay sneakily approached and complimented Luca for shooting all the targets square in the head, saying he guessed the top student really is of a different breed. Speechless, Luca looked at him. With a grin, Ilay asked Luca if he was already getting used to the right eye he got transplanted. He added that it's unfair that Luca is this good with a gun despite specializing in close combat. Luca told him it's only natural that members of the guards are good with all types of weapons. Also, he didn't want to hear such praises from someone who managed to shoot every shot through the same hole. Ilay laughed, saying his specialty just happens to be with guns. Luca countered, saying he'd eventually surpass Ilay if he continued being nonchalant. Ilay, unhinged, replied with a grin that he'd welcome it if Luca surpasses him, since he's always rooting for Luca, just like he said before. What's more, the Empire needs people like Luca. His expression dimmed as he told Luca that the value of ability and talent is being diluted in the Empire, and as long as one has status and power, even the powerless can become talented. However, he added that if more naturally talented irregulars like Luca start to appear, it's certain that people will soon be able to distinguish between those who are truly talented and those who aren't. His words immediately changed Luca's expression. Luca then told Ilay that what he's saying sounds like he's criticizing the Empire's system. If Luca were to report exactly what he said to headquarters, Ilay wouldn't be able to get away with it, even if he's a Karthika. Ilay smirked and turned around, telling Luca that if he was really going to report him, he wouldn't have told him in the first place since he's already aware that Luca is a good person. He then thanked Luca for worrying about him. Luca cracked his gun, speechless, deeming Ilay to be so annoying. Now, it's been 2 years into training, third quarter. A van was driving through. Inside that van was the commander, instructing Ilay and Luca to act as platoon leaders in their ongoing training. He then said that if any trainee has an issue with his appointment, they should stand up and leave. Since no one stood up, he decided to continue with what he was saying. He continued, explaining that across the gorge, there is a Korite outpost illegally stationed in their territory. This training they'd be doing was to test the trainees' abilities in the field. Determined, he told them there's no need for prisoners, so they should kill them all. The trainees exited the van, with Ilay and Luca in front. Ilay commented that it's their first real mission, prompting Luca to ask Ilay if he's nervous since he has already killed people during training. Ilay countered, saying this is the first time they're facing an outside force. He added that the Belatine Federation, the Holy Korite Alliance, and even the Acretian Empire all have planet Earth's humanity as ancestors. Luca interrupted, telling Ilay there's no need to get lost in his emotions, then questioned Ilay if he thought the trainees believed the senior guards were there to protect them. Their fully bodied mechanical armor legion, then added that he's sure the seniors are just there to supervise them. They might even kill them if they tried taking anyone as a prisoner. Of course, the idiots who aren't aware of their place do not belong in the Imperial Guard. He continued, telling Ilay that on planet Novus, other forces are just bugs to the Empire. They learned that everyone there uses and deceives the Empire for their own gains. Ilay looked at him speechless, then said he knows. That's what they were taught. Now, they began their mission. Luca, in his suit, began taking down the Korans. Other trainees assisted, taking down both the armed and unarmed. Luca thought to himself that it looks like none of the Korans are armed, so the training should end without problems. As he walked forward, he saw a child crying amidst the chaos. A child crying for his mom. This made Luca waver, since it's a child who's so scared he can't even move. A non-combatant with no gun. He wavered, wishing that if only the child had a gun, he would have ended it quickly. Seeing the tears on the child's face, he remembered the commander's determined last words, to kill everyone. As he tried killing the child, he told himself not to hesitate since they're only insects who sap up the Empire's supplies. Then he stabbed, his sword piercing through the wall, but he didn't kill the child. He told the child to pretend like he's dead. He might be able to live if he did so. Luca knew he shouldn't disobey orders because if headquarters ever obtained knowledge of his actions, he didn't know what would happen to him. As he was leaving, he questioned if he should go back and kill the child. Bang! A bullet sniped through the child's head. Surprised, Luca looked up, and the sniper was Ilay. Ile shook his head, telling Luca not to make such mistakes. Panic-driven, Luca was surprised to see Ile, wondering since when Ile was there. Was he watching everything? But he decided to calm down, certain that Ile wouldn't report him. However, if any of the trainees saw, then things would be complicated, so he decided to keep an eye on Ile. While distracted, a ray of light appeared behind Ile. Boom! The place he was standing exploded, prompting Luca to worry about Ile's safety. But there was no time for that since the attacker was behind him, prepared to launch another attack, and yelled vigorously for the accretions to go to hell. Luca stood his ground, wondering if the man was the one who caused the explosion just now. If the man could cause an explosion without weapons, then he wasn't ordinary. At the same time, one of the trainees decided to attack from behind, but the man swiftly countered, taking the person down and shattering his suit. Luca, surprised, realized that the man was a force user. The man, angry, furiously told Luca that the place wasn't a base but a settlement, and the people he killed were just doing their best to live. Other trainees appeared, some injured. Luca then wondered if the captain already knew about the existence of a force user. If he had told them beforehand, nothing would have happened to Ile. Ile, whose 4 limbs were blown away, told Luca that he let his guard down so he had no excuses. Relieved that Ile was alive, Luca told Ile through their mic to get some rest while he took care of the force user. Luca realized that his hesitation was the cause of the problem. Since he had learned countless times how to deal with a force user, he decided to do whatever it took to make up for his mistakes. Through communication, he told the other trainees he would take care of the man so they should all disperse and take over the base. They obeyed, leaving Luca and the man alone. The man, angered, questioned where the hell bastards like them thought they were going. Seeing this, Luca deduced that the man must be acting as bait for his allies to get away. Luca knew that in order for one to use force, the user needed to perform a preparatory action. In the man's case, his would be hand signs. So as long as Luca could see a disruption in space, he could react to the explosions. Successfully, he dodged all the explosions sent his way. At the same time, the man was bleeding through his nose. Luca charged forward at high speed. Though he preferred a battle of attrition, he had no other choice because his body would collapse first if he continued maintaining high-speed maneuvers. He needed to attack while he was in the high-speed state. As an attack appeared before him, he increased his speed further, passing through the explosion for a close combat strike. The man grit his teeth as Luca appeared in front of him. But just as Luca thought he had the man used his hand to attack Luca's face. Though Luca's sword pierced the man's chest, he didn't come out unscathed. His helmet shattered from the attack, and he thought about death at that moment. However, seeing that Luca was just a child, the man hesitated, with tears dripping down his face. This gave Luca enough time to swiftly take the man down, his body lying lifeless on the ground while Luca was breathing heavily. Luca knew too well that he would have died if the man had gone through with his attack. As he breathed heavily, he wondered why the man failed to kill him, since Korite soldiers were known to be fanatics beyond human comprehension. But Luca decided to move on and not let his emotions consume him during battle. He reminded himself that he was doing it all for the Empire, to kill those who threatened the safety of the Emperor and the people of the Empire. That was the sole reason for the Imperial Guard's existence, nothing else. Hours later at the Accretion Hospital recovery room, Luca and Ile were undergoing treatment. Ile asked Luca how it felt to almost die. Luca, speechless for a moment, then told Ile to speak for himself since it was him who almost died. Ile laughed, saying he got new arms and legs this time, then asked Luca how many he had changed. Luca replied that his back was destroyed, so he got titanium bones and artificial skin. And since he's going to end up with a completely new body in a couple of years anyway, he might as well get them a little early. Ile looked at Luca, then questioned if the boss probably knew there was a force user, then said that the reason why they didn't hear anything about it was probably a test. Luca, speechless, then told Ile that seeing how their seniors didn't step up to help, they probably figured they could handle it. What's more, nobody was killed in action anyway. But Ile added that something was wrong since he and the other cadet who got blasted with a force attack head-on survived. He deemed it to be a little too odd to say it was all a coincidence. Maybe the force user didn't intend to kill them from the start, he added. Luca was speechless, recalling the force user's last moments. He said to himself that he's already a warrior, a soldier, so the man letting him live was a mistake on his part. Angered, he deemed his pathetic mercy to be the reason why the Korine will continue to die out, so he told the man to regret it as he watched his comrades continue to die in hell. Ile then asked Luca why he closed the eyes of the Korine girl. Luca, speechless, then turned around, telling Ile he talked too much, or asking if he got a new tongue together with his body parts. Gritting his teeth, he replied that it was a mistake, saying it would never happen again. Hours later, at another scene, an instructor told them that they had now completed 2 out of 4 years of their Imperial Guard training, and that there were now batches younger than them, so they should be a model to those new recruits. He then called out Luca and Ile, telling them to be a model as the top 1 and the top 2. If they also aimed to be a centurion, they should keep at it for the glory of the Emperor and his citizens. They replied, "Yes, sir." Luca thought about the word centurion. The Imperial Guard is organized quite simply. There are 1,000 guardsmen, consisting of 10 sentries, all commanded by a chief centurion. The commander of the guards, the chief centurion, is also the centurion of the first century. Cadets like Luca, after finishing a full-body mechanization, are assigned to the lowest-ranking sentry, the 10th sentry. The instructor then told them that's all and they should continue their training. Luca thought to himself that if he becomes the centurion of the 10th century, then he can make it big. Now they continued their training. Luca and Ile were sparring at the arena. Ilay sent a punch, but Luca parried it with his hand. They continued exchanging multiple blows, each attacking and defending. As sweat dripped down Luca's face, he said to himself that Ilay had gotten stronger with his new arm. But he was also different. Then, Luca went to attack Ilay's leg. As Ilay was off balance, Luca immediately went for a direct punch, but stopped before the blow could reach Ilay. With a smile, he told Ilay that their sparring now made 124 rounds, with him winning them all. The scene shifts. They both sat on a platform. Ilay told Luca he thought he'd finally win this time, but Luca told him that if getting new parts was all there was to getting stronger, then there's no use for training. Ilay countered, telling Luca it seemed like he had become more rigid after the instructor's speech, and it seemed like the instructor mentioning Centurion had impacted him a lot. Luca replied, of course, if he had experience serving as an Imperial guard, he'd be welcomed anywhere. Ilay added, telling Luca that he was already in a position where his birth no longer mattered. So why didn't he relax a little? But Luca countered, saying that unlike Ilay, he had no place to return to. So he had to keep climbing, or it was over. Then, he told Ilay that he had talent but lacked drive, then asked Ilay why he wanted to become a guardian. Ilay never expected Luca to notice his lack of drive. With a smile, he told Luca that he wanted to be a scholar, an archaeologist, to study the ancient arcane civilization. Luca asked why the change of mind then, to which Ilay replied that it was banned in the Empire for an individual to study the arcane civilization. Besides, his family had already produced multiple generals, so they'd never allow him to do anything else. Luca asked him if he was saying he was sad because he couldn't do what he wanted, calling him a spoiled brat. Then he told Ilay there were countless people in the slums who weren't guaranteed to live another day. Plenty were even thankful just to have something to eat. Ilay told Luca he knew he'd say that, but what he just told him was a secret of his. Luca told him someone might interpret what he said as a criticism of the Empire, and he'd be ruined if someone reported it. Ilay nodded, knowing Luca wouldn't report, just like how he kept his secret. But Luca countered, saying he just hesitated because his opponent was a non-combatant, and even if it wasn't for him, he'd have gone back for the kill. With a sharp stare, he told Ilay he's loyal to the Empire and the Emperor for recognizing his talents, so the enemies of the Empire are his enemies. Not even Ilay is an exception to that. Ilay smiled, then called Luca a liar as he jumped down, saying that if Luca's allegiance to the Empire truly surpassed simple loyalty, then he'd have already killed him on the spot. As he walked out, he told Luca not to push himself too hard, but Luca called him an idiot, murmuring that Ilay would die if he kept up such a habit. Time passed. During the third-year training mission, reconnaissance in an uninhabited neutral zone, Ilay placed his hand on something, saying they'd arrived at an arcane site. He commented that there was an energy response, despite it being millions of years old. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he asked Luca if this place wasn't cool, since there were civilizations that explored the stars, before humans even existed. Luca, speechless, said to himself that he had drawn a line, but it seemed like Ilay didn't hesitate to cross it. He then told Ilay not to get careless since the reconnaissance mission was part of their training, and if they met another force while doing their mission, it was going to be a fight. But Ilay was still unserious, saying that even if they couldn't beat them, he was sure someone from the guards would help them. His actions were really pissing Luca off. Someone then approached them, saying that the present exists because of the past, and that record allows them to predict the future. Thinking of it that way, it makes sense that so many people are interested in history. The person was an Accretion Imperial Guard trainee, Claude Ramones. Luca recognized him and said to himself that Claude's family was not as big as the Carthicus, but he still came from a respected family. Claude then asked Luca if he could ask him one thing. He told Luca that he liked him, so he asked Luca if he was seeing someone. Luca immediately went on the defensive, telling Claude he'd consider him a threat if he came any closer. But Claude told Luca there was no need for him to be scared, saying that if Luca wasn't seeing anyone, he was going to introduce him to his little sister. Luca told him he was from an orphanage, but Claude didn't care. Whether Luca was from an orphanage or from nobility, Luca was likely to end up as his superior. Claude told Luca to think about it since his sister was cute, then commented on Luca's popularity. Suddenly, Luca and Ilay noticed something, so they immediately went on alert. Luca told the team there was a biological response. Ilay's group was to take cover and provide support from the rear, while Claude and he would stay in the front. As Luca looked ahead, he noticed something up ahead. It was someone, and above that someone was a cube. But as soon as he saw the person clearly, shivers ran down his spine because that someone was a Korite paladin. To make things worse, the person noticed them. Before they could react, the person sent a spear attack at them. Luca panicked and shouted for Claude to run, but the spear was faster as it pierced through the tree and into Claude's body, sending him flying, an instant kill from the Korite paladin. As the spear took down Claude, it returned back as if it had a consciousness of its own, passing through the trees, back to the Korite paladin as if nothing happened. Luca stood speechless, looking at Claude's corpse and recalling his last speech. He breathed heavily, panic-driven. What he saw was just the glowing spear, and the next thing that happened was Claude's upper body being blown away. He looked back to the Korite paladin, trying to analyze, but his mechanical eyes started showing errors. He was sweating all over due to fear. He commanded the eye to calculate the spear's trajectory no matter what, but the system kept bringing errors. Bullets were immediately fired at the paladin, but they were unable to break through its defense. The shooters immediately told Luca to get it together. He shouldn't just stand there. He should fight and stall for time. The person talking was Ilay. Luca realized Ilay's words were right because even if he tried to run, he wouldn't be able to escape the situation. Then there's only one way to tackle it, which is to fight until the Imperial guards arrive. If they could hold on for just a dozen or so seconds, he's sure the Imperial Guard member that was watching would get here. Now, the countdown begins. He stood to confront the paladin. The paladin stretched his hand and shot his spear at Luca. As Luca dodged the strike, he realized that just a dozen or so seconds was enough for the paladin to kill them, because just a single strike from the paladin was able to damage his helmet, grazing his face in the process. The paladin controlled the spear to attack Luca from behind. At that moment, as Luca looked back, the only word that came to his mind was death. He panicked, questioning if he was going to die since there was no way he could survive a fight against such a monster even for a dozen seconds. But at that moment, he recalled the commander once telling him that he looked like a pig that had realized it's going to be mauled in a slaughterhouse. With vigor, he shouted at Luca, telling him that the moment he turned his back on the enemy, all he would receive is a bullet to his head. So if the enemy swings their blade, then he should do the same. Weaklings are not needed in the Imperial Guard. It was already 3 seconds. Luca clenched his teeth, turned around to attack first before the paladin started moving. With a swing, he blocked the spear sent at him, shattering the energy used to control it, causing an intense explosion on sight. Ile worriedly shouted Luca's name. At the same time, half of Luca's sword was sent flying, piercing the ground. Now, more than 5 seconds had passed. Luca stood, breathing heavily. Blocking the spear attack didn't come without a cost. 6 seconds gone, though he was unable to use his hand anymore. He was able to block the spear, but he realized he'd need to prepare for the next attack since the paladin wouldn't give him time to catch his breath. 7 seconds gone. Now 8 seconds. The paladin pulled out its sword and launched a powerful sword slash at Luca. Luca dodged it, but he lost his hand in the process. Though he dodged, the strike took down the other cadets, splitting their bodies into multiple parts. The fate of the cadets was unknown, same for Ile. Seeing this, Luca realized the paladin wasn't going for him. 10 seconds gone. The paladin charged forward, and it arrived in front of Luca in the next 11 seconds. Luca stood surprised, but he clenched his teeth and activated his last strength, then charged forward to confront the paladin. Almost 13 seconds passed. Their superior arrived in the area, activated his energy, and charged forward at full speed. He doubled his speed to the location where Luca was, and before Luca could clash with the paladin, determined to stake his life, his supervisor grabbed the paladin's head, cracking its helmet and slamming it to the wall. He didn't just stop there. He brought out his gun and shot the paladin into the relic. Luca looked in their direction, surprised as he breathed heavily. Now within the smoke, emerged the supervisor. Seeing this, Luca immediately went down full of joy, knowing he survived, but the battle was far from over. The supervisor immediately activated his energy, seeing that the paladin had regained consciousness. The paladin regained balance with his sword, stood up gradually, which prompted the supervisor to draw out his sword, while Luca was also watching them from behind. As Luca breathed heavily, he wondered who was going to win between an Imperial Guard wearing the weapon of the Empire, Legion, and a holy knight of the Korite who used the Force. Now they both charged out to confront each other. Their weapons clashed, causing an intense explosion on sight, armor shattering. For a moment, there was silence. Then came an intense shockwave as both began fighting at an astonishing speed, each clash causing explosions, with the trees bearing witness to their might. The battle raged on, both equal in strength. Luca, on the other hand, realized they were so fast that he couldn't even track their weapons with his eyes. Such was the battle of an Imperial Guard. But he prayed dearly for the Imperial Guard to win. The Korite paladin stood his ground, worthy of his name, and with force, pushed back the Imperial Guard, both shattering their weapons due to the impact. The Imperial Guard immediately grabbed the Korite paladin's head. Though calm, he sent a powerful force through the paladin's head, but the paladin wasn't taken down with that strike. The paladin imbued energy into his hand with the intention of controlling his spear behind Luca, to launch a sneak attack on the Imperial Guard. At that moment, a thought passed through Luca's mind. The Imperial Guard, who had no idea about the speed and power of the spear he had experienced, would likely be unable to react to it. Seeing this, Luca knew he'd die if the Imperial Guard were to die, so he needed to do something. The spear, fully imbued with energy by the paladin, charged out of the ground. At that slight moment, Luca used his leg to disrupt its direction, which shattered his leg in the process. But that was the least of his problems. He prayed, wishing that the spear would miss. The Imperial Guard saw the attack, but it passed through his head, only shattering his armor. The paladin immediately grabbed the Imperial Guard's hand, restraining him, then imbued energy into his left hand to attack. But the Imperial Guard was fast to react, and with overwhelming force, punched the paladin, slamming him into the ground, causing an explosion on sight. Luca, who lost his balance, fell, wondering what had just happened and who survived. He closed his eyes, knowing that if the Korite paladin survived, he had no way of surviving. Someone then walked toward him as he wished for the death of the Korite paladin. As his eyes were closed, the Imperial Guard complimented Luca for his good work, saying he was able to take down the paladin thanks to him disrupting the spear's direction. The guard then asked Luca if he had received a wound on his abdomen. Luca replied he was hurt when he tried to dodge his force slash. The Imperial Guard then stretched out his hand to assist Luca to the base. But at that moment, Luca's face was filled with shock as he saw the Imperial Guard. Legion is the full-body mechanical armor the Empire bestows upon their Imperial Guards by removing all feeble parts of the body unnecessary for combat. It is an item that allows one to become the ultimate weapon. Every trainee dreams of receiving a Legion, as it is the testament of the Imperial Guard. However, the Imperial Guard was still alive despite his head being blown off. Luca panicked, commenting, "You're alive, but do not have a brain," then asked the Imperial Guard if he was human or a machine. Hearing this, the Imperial Guard wavered, questioning if his brain was gone. Realizing the truth, he screamed out in agony, which led to his death. Luca, disappointed, realized he had been striving to become a monster like the Imperial Guard this whole time. But the pressing matter at hand was his body becoming cold, and he couldn't stop shaking from before. He wondered if he could survive until help arrived, or else this would be the last sight of his life. To his surprise, someone arrived, asking Luca if he was still alive. Luca never expected Ile to survive, though Ile wasn't in the best condition either. Luca then asked about the others, to which Ile replied that aside from the two of them, they were all dead. Ile sat down, then asked Luca how bad his wounds were. Luca told him he was going to die soon, then asked Ile what he planned to do now. He told Ile to look ahead. The life he had wanted all this time was right in front of his eyes, in the direction of Korite and Bellotto, since what he wished for couldn't be found in the Empire. Luca told Ile he was alright, so he could go if he wanted to. He told him to make it quick since reinforcements would arrive soon, and once they did, they'd have to return to the Empire. Speechless for a moment, Ile stood up. As he walked forward, Luca said to himself that Ile came from a background with guaranteed wealth and fame, along with the ability to back it up, so any citizen of the Empire would be jealous of him. Though Luca didn't seem to understand Ile. When Ile talked about his dreams, it was the brightest Luca had ever seen him shine. Luca hoped Ile would live how he wanted, then closed his eyes to accept his death. But to his surprise, Ile didn't leave, and instead came to stop Luca's bleeding. Luca called him an idiot, asking what he was doing. With a grin, Ile remarked that seeing Luca act like that had made him worried he might actually die. If that happened, there was no way he'd be able to live on guilt-free if Luca died like that. Luca sighed, calling Ile an idiot, and above them, support finally arrived. The story shifts to Luca, who is engrossed in reading a comic book. He looks completely captivated, when, suddenly, Alia stuns him from behind, asking if he's looking for new arms. Alia points toward the page of the comic book, revealing that it isn't just an ordinary comic book, but rather a book about prosthetic body parts. Alia then tells Luca that if he's really searching for a new arm, he would recommend the F-24, as it has an easy learning curve. With its help, Luca would be able to return to duty quickly, and its specs are likely better than his old one. Luca turns around to face him, and advises him to stop popping up out of nowhere like that. Alia laughs, asking if Luca was scared, and apologizes for startling him. After returning to the Empire and completing his recovery, Luca was summoned repeatedly for investigations. The officials wanted to question him about the tragedy that involved the death of one Imperial Guard and several cadets. This event later became known as the Korite Paladin Encounter Incident. However, to his surprise, the investigations weren't about that case. As both of them sit together now, Alia asks Luca if he's heard the rumors about an artifact being discovered at the ruins they had visited. He explains that everyone is trying to guess its rightful owner. Luca wonders if the spinning cube he saw was responsible for the tragedy and asks Alia about who is retrieving it. Alia replies that, based on his information, a team of experts is being assembled for the task. He adds that if the Core Alliance refuses to relinquish the ruins and artifacts to them, a major war might break out. The battle between the two empires would escalate, and if an all-out war occurred with Korra, it would only benefit the Bellotto Federation. For that reason, the conflict has so far been kept at a local level to make the losses more manageable. Luca responds that he isn't interested in politics. His job as an Imperial Guard is simply to fight as ordered by his superiors. However, he begins thinking about the Imperial Guard soldiers he had encountered. He recalls reporting one of the members whose head had been blown off. When he mentioned it, the captain explained it as a phantom phenomenon caused by residual signals. But Luca wonders if that's truly the case, as the soldier had responded to his words even after death. To him, that couldn't be just a phantom phenomenon. Despite his unanswered questions, Luca knew better than to pursue information that headquarters refused to disclose. Luca says there is a gorgeous place within the cadet training facilities that doesn't fit in with its surroundings, the visitor's room. It was created for cadets to meet with friends and family. Having grown up in an orphanage, Luca never thought he would have a reason to come here. Naturally, he didn't expect anyone to visit him either. However, to his surprise, a white-haired girl named Lillian, the younger sister of the recently deceased Claude, came to see him. He wondered why she was there, suspecting she might be there to interrogate him since he was in charge when her brother died. To his surprise, Lillian told him not to think she was there to blame him for her brother's death. She explained that ever since her brother decided to become a member of the Imperial Guard, her family had prepared themselves for the possibility of losing him. Raising her teacup, she mentioned that the only reason she came was to meet him. Her brother often spoke of him, saying he was a skilled comrade, and had asked her to get to know him if she ever had the chance. Luca looked at her, asking if she knew about his background. She replied that their situation required fewer formalities, partly because of that. Luca remarked that she was making it seem like she was interested in him. She asked if he opposed the idea, and he responded that he didn't know anything about her. She brushed it off, saying it wasn't a big deal, he could get to know her. Luca then asked why she approached him, and she explained that her late brother's request should be a good enough reason. She added that it was a good offer for him and that many would envy his position. Luca thought about it and acknowledged that she was right. He had no reason to reject the opportunity. For someone like him, marrying a woman of noble status would be a golden chance, a way to achieve his goals and succeed in life. However, the offer seemed too easy, and because of that, he felt reluctant. This hesitation led him to refuse her. Lillian looked surprised as Luca stood up from the table. Without clarifying further, he walked away, saying that he used to think people from noble backgrounds were foolish for wanting to escape the Empire. However, he never thought he would be dumb enough to make decisions based on feelings. He was sure Lillian would take this as an insult as a noble, and he hoped nothing troublesome would come of it before he could leave. Lillian grabbed his hand, stopping him. Luca was taken aback. She then admitted that she might have been rushing things and suggested they start as friends instead. Her face was flushed as she looked at him. Luca turned back, trying to explain that he didn't mean to offend her, but she ran off, saying she would visit again soon. Luca stares at his hand and sweats nervously, saying that it looks like she is going to be hard to get rid of as she runs out of the door. Back in the physical training facility, Luca is standing in front of a man who is staring down at him and laughing, mentioning that he never thought he'd see the day Luca sought him out of his own accord. He is Acacia's Imperial Guard martial artist instructor, Kinuan. Luca replies that he is here to learn some moves from him. The instructor responds that there is nothing left for him to learn when it comes to martial arts, as he is already incredible at it, and is the most skilled in the history of the guards. Frankly, no one has ever reached his level, aside from a few cadets. Luca thinks that it still means there were some who were better than him, and tells the instructor that, according to him, being the best among the cadets isn't enough. The instructor chuckles and asks him not to be so ambitious. Luca thinks that Kinuan is the strongest among the others, but not as intimidating as the other instructors. Unlike the other instructors and Imperial guards, he uses an ordinary low-powered robotic body. Compared to the new augment he just got, he should be 10 times stronger than him. The only thing that puts him at a disadvantage is the fact that, since Kinuan doesn't have full-body augmentation, he is much weaker. Luca further thinks that if he can't win against an opponent like Kinuan, he won't stand a chance against someone as strong as the Koran Paladin. He thanks Kinuan for this opportunity. The instructor sighs, mentioning that Luca hasn't left him with any other choice in that case, and tells him to go ahead and start. Luca immediately charges in without hesitation, but Kinuan deflects the punch, asking him if he wanted to test out his new augment. Luca doesn't answer, thinking that Kinuan might be a retired Imperial guard, but he knew Kinuan would not even flinch when facing an attack like this. Luca continues his barrage as Kinuan parries the attacks. Luca swiftly shifts his leg, thinking that he will simply jump on him to close the distance and finish things quickly. He stretches his hand forward to capitalize on the distance and grabs onto Kinuan's coat. He tightens his grip, then rotates his hand, pulling him down. With his left hand, he rears it back, punching forward, thinking that it's his win, as according to him, Kinuan has no way to block it. Kinuan watches as the punch gets closer, and then his eyes have a faint blue shimmer to them. Immediately, Luca looks down at him, confused, wondering when he ended up in the air. As he comes down, he catches himself with his hands on the ground, thinking that Kinuan won't let him stop like that. Luca comes in with a capoeira-type kick, and it looks as if it hits Kinuan, but it's not the case. It must have been centimeters from his face as Kinuan grabs onto Luca's foot and tosses him into the air yet again, leaving him completely confused. This time, Luca couldn't get control of his body and bounces along the ground. He lays there, looking at Kinuan, wondering what the hell is going on. Kinuan walks toward him, telling him that he not only failed to gauge the strength of his opponent, but he dared let his mind be distracted by something else during their fight. He stares at his face with a strong look in his eyes, asking him why he was in such a rush. Luke struggled to process what had just happened. From his perspective, his first attack should have struck Kinuan square in the chin. However, as soon as Kinuan had touched his arm, Luca's entire world seemed to distort. He had lost control over his body completely. The kinetic energy he had directed at Kinuan had been transferred back into his own body, leaving him thoroughly shaken. Sitting up, he asked Kinuan what had just occurred. Kinuan explained that it was a self-defense technique he had mastered. Despite the confusion and shock, Luke stood up and asked if Kinuan could teach him the same skill. Kinuan's left hand trembled visibly as blood began to drip from his nose. He asked Luke if he still wanted to learn, even after witnessing the side effects. Kinuan warned him that such methods always came at a cost. After some time, as the two sat down together, Kinuan asked Luke what he had learned from the fight. Luke admitted that he felt as though he had been entranced and that his body had moved entirely on its own, outside of his control. Kinuan explained that the technique was known as Archi's Victima, often referred to as the Archi's combat method. Luke expressed surprise, remarking that the term was typically associated with thugs. However, he found the method impressive and suggested that it could be developed into a military standard. Kinuan acknowledged that the military had considered it but explained that 3 significant problems made it unsuitable. When asked if he could guess the issues, Luke identified the first one, the difficulty of learning the technique. Kinuan confirmed his observation and pressed him to identify the others. Luke guessed that the brain problems Kinuan exhibited were one of the side effects, which Kinuan confirmed as correct. However, Luke was unable to deduce the third issue. Determined to grow stronger, Luke declared his willingness to take on the risks associated with the technique. Kinuan, standing up, reminded him that such a decision was not his to make. As an asset of the Empire, enormous resources had already been invested in him. Luke tried to convince Kinuan to reconsider, but Kinuan posed a critical question. If training in the Archi's combat method inevitably caused brain damage, could Luke swear to stop using it if the symptoms arose? Luke froze, knowing that Kinuan would see through a lie. After a moment, he admitted that he couldn't make such a promise, though he vowed to do his best to limit its use. Kinuan smirked and turned to face Luca, placing a hand on his shoulder. He told him he liked his honesty. In one swift motion, Kinuan swept his leg under Luca's and pushed him to the side, knocking him to the ground. He then remarked that, from now on, Luke should always anticipate an attack from him, as that would prepare him for any situation. Luke sat up chuckling, and asked if this meant what he thought it did. Kinuan faced him, telling him to get up, saying he liked fast learners. Sometime later, Ilya noticed the dark bags under Luca's eyes and asked if he was getting enough sleep. Luke brushed it off, saying he was just busy these days. It had been a month since Luke started sparring with Kinuan daily. During their last session, Kinuan told Luke that if he couldn't learn by watching, then no amount of instruction would help him. He explained that he hadn't particularly taught him anything yet, as the goal was for Luke to observe and learn on his own. Kinuan explained that the Archi's combat method was vastly different from traditional techniques. Most combat methods focus on mastering a specific skill and honing it. In contrast, the Archi's combat method seeks to optimize the skills one already possesses, using them as tools to create the most efficient fighting style in a matter of seconds. It was less about brute force and more about utilizing the mind. Later, Kinuan asked Ilya about his latest mission. Ilya replied that it was dull, as it only involved dealing with a malfunctioning android. He complained that most of his recent missions were child's play. Luke commented that Korite was likely being cautious after the last incident, which might explain why the chief centurion hadn't been around. Ilya disagreed, mentioning that the situation wasn't as simple as Luke assumed. Ilya went on to reveal that, according to rumors from his family, a group had plotted a rebellion. Luke stared at Ilya for a moment before turning away. He muttered in frustration about how they were already at war with the Holy Alliance, and now some idiots wanted to start a civil war. Grinding his teeth, he called them foolish. But Ilya told Luca that disregarding the problems as stupidity would only lead to the Empire rotting from the inside. At this, Luke snapped, slamming Ilya against the wall and shouting that while he could tolerate his desire to leave the Empire, he wouldn't allow him to become an enemy. Ilya, trembling, quickly assured him that he had passed the aptitude test to become an Imperial guard. He explained that he thought the notion of rebellion might hold some significance for the Empire, and asked Luke to calm down. Luke stepped back, telling Ilya never to spout such nonsense again. He warned him that he didn't want to see his name on a rebel list. Ilya took a deep breath, apologizing, and assured Luke that he only mentioned it in private. Extending a hand, he tried to calm Luke down, offering to treat him to a nice meal. However, Luke declined, saying he had plans and asking Ilya to stop being so irritating. Ilya teased Luca, asking if his plans involved a girl. When Luke didn't reply, Ilya asked if he wasn't planning to leave. The scene shifted to the lower sector of the city, with Kinuan and Luke walking through the streets. Kinuan mentioned how long it had been since they were there, reminiscing about how the slums were a familiar place for both of them. Luke admitted that when he became a trainee, he thought he would never have to return to the lower sector. He didn't want to breathe the same air as the people there. Kinuan commented that Luke was the type to climb high, while Luke looked around, thinking it was strange that Kinuan had brought him here. The air in the lower sector was disgusting, as the city relied on magma beneath it for thermal energy, releasing unfiltered waste and heat into the slums. Back when Luke lived there, he had felt a constant need to escape, believing that staying would make him a loser for life. Thinking about those days only pissed him off. Kinuan interrupted his thoughts, asking him to follow. They made their way through an alley and turned a corner, arriving at a bustling market. Luke asked if it was the black market. Kinuan asked if it was Luca's first time there. Luke replied that many kids who visited the place out of curiosity never returned. As Luke observed Kinuan, he realized how knowledgeable he was about the lower sector. Despite being an Imperial guard for over a decade, Kinuan knew this place better than Luca, who grew up there. Adding to the mystery, their instructor had ordered Luke to use prosthetic limbs with low energy for this trip, leaving him unable to figure out what the instructor was planning. Suddenly, Kinuan told Luke to get ready as they approached a door guarded by two men. One guard pointed to a different entrance, saying that was the way for spectators. Kinuan replied that he needed to speak to the establishment's supervisor. The guard asked if he knew their boss, Aleph. Kinuan chuckled, admitting he didn't know him but wanted to meet him. The guard immediately drew his gun and pointed it at Kinuan's head. Kinuan smiled, and before the man could react, Luke latched onto him with a strange grapple, taking him to the ground. When the second guard drew his weapon, Luke pointed the first guard's gun at him, ordering him not to move, while keeping the first restrained. The second guard raised his hands, and Kinuan remarked that he seemed to understand the situation. He asked the guard to take them to his master. The guards left their weapons on the floor and led them inside. As they walked, Luke asked Kinuan what he would have done if he hadn't been fast enough. Kinuan replied that he would have found another way. Luke then asked what this place was. Kinuan grinned and explained that it was the hottest spot in the entire empire. When Luke pressed for clarification, Kinuan laughed and revealed that it was the Colosseum. As they entered the room, the guards remained outside while Kinuan and Luca faced Aleph. Aleph stared at them, his expression cold and calculating. Kinuan raised a hand, gesturing toward Luca, and told Aleph to put him in a match. He added casually that he didn't need a cut, and it was fine if Luca died fighting. Luca turned to Kinuan, shocked, realizing this was the reason the instructor had ordered him to come with a low-output body. Without warning, Aleph flicked his burning cigarette toward Kinuan. Before it could touch him, Luca caught it in his hand and crushed it effortlessly. The quick action startled the men around them, and they immediately raised their guns, aiming at Kinuan and Luca. Aleph smirked, mentioning that Luca seemed confused. He explained that they hadn't let them in to grant their wishes. Rather, they had been called to a place where it would be easy to dispose of a corpse. Luca observed Aleph closely, thinking it was a bluff. If Aleph truly had no intention of hearing them out, he would have already shot them. With 3 men directly aiming at them and 2 armed guards standing outside, Luca quickly ran a simulation in his head. He imagined his first move would be to kick the table in front of them toward Aleph, causing a distraction. Then, he would swiftly rush forward, grab Aleph by the neck, and use him as a shield. He would shoot the 2 gang members in the room before the other 2 guards rushed in. As they entered, he'd jump ahead of them and take them out too. As his mental simulation ended, Kinuan spoke, asking Aleph what had happened to the previous owner. Aleph smirked, asking if Kinuan knew Tora, and revealed that Tora had died after being caught rigging matches. Kinuan responded matter-of-factly, accusing Aleph of killing Tora and taking over the Colosseum for its profitability. He further mentioned that while they had been old friends, he didn't blame Aleph, as Tora had also killed the man before him to claim his position. It was simply the natural way of things in the streets. Alif's demeanor changed instantly. Rising from his seat, he pointed a gun directly at Kinuan's head, shouting and demanding to know how he could possibly know all of this. Kinuan, unfazed, calmly told Alif to relax unless he wanted to end up next to Tora. Alif ground his teeth in frustration before lowering the gun and returning to his seat. With a sharp command, he ordered his men to lower their weapons as well. Adjusting his glasses, Alif asked if all Kinuan wanted was to have the brat put into a match. He analyzed Luca's body, commenting that his arms and legs weren't made for combat, and that his organic frame would be crushed to a bloody pulp in seconds. He leaned back in his chair and added that while he could arrange for Luca to fight, it wouldn't be fair unless Kinuan offered him something in return. Kinuan replies confidently that he knows where Tora kept his safe, questioning if Alif had his eyes on it. Alif stares at Kinuan, his curiosity piqued, asking how much he knows and expressing interest in Kinuan's identity. Kinuan chuckles, telling him not to worry, as he's just a spirit of the past. Alif offers Kinuan a chance to spectate, adding that he can provide VIP seats, good booze, and girls. Kinuan declines the extravagance, stating that booze will suffice, but insists that Luca shouldn't receive any special treatment and should be paired with Alif's best fighter. Luca watches Kinuan in awe, amazed at how he managed to take control of the situation without lifting a finger. Luca thinks about how much he still has to learn from Kinuan, who possesses a calm and commanding presence that he himself lacks. In the Colosseum's waiting area, the system announces that the fight will take place in 2 hours, advising them to warm up. Luca turns to Kinuan, asking why Alif is so interested in Tora's safe. Kinuan explains that it's Tora's hidden treasure, something valuable enough to change Alif's life. Luca then asks what Kinuan would have done if a fight had broken out earlier. Kinuan smirks and says it must be something Luca wants to know badly, promising to explain after Luca wins his match. He shows Luca the pad screen, revealing that his opponent's name is Gabriel. Kinuan adds that the Colosseum is filled with fighters who use illegal modifications that shorten their lifespans. Gabriel is likely one of those types, someone who doesn't care about his future. With Luca's current body, a single hit could kill him, so Kinuan advises him to listen carefully. He begins to share a fundamental principle of the Archi's combat method. Luca asks what it is, lowering his hand to listen closely. Kinuan advises him to learn to be satisfied with what he has. Luca protests, saying he's learned that being satisfied means losing. Kinuan counters, comparing satisfaction to water. Water doesn't lose, he explains. It merely changes its form. Kinuan goes on to say that Luca has real potential, mentioning how he was impressed when Luca deflected a bullet without using a ballistic predictor. Kinuan recalls being surprised when Luca asked him to teach him, saying it showed his determination. Placing a hand on Luca's shoulder, Kinuan tells him he's come to the right person. Luca brushes it off, saying Kinuan's praise is unfounded. Kinuan smiles slyly, admitting that it might be because this could be the last time they see each other. Luca's eyes widen in alarm, but Kinuan doesn't elaborate. Later, as Luca walks toward the tournament ring, the crowd around him buzzes with mockery and disbelief. People laugh, pointing at him, and some shout that he's foolish for daring to challenge Steel Fist Gabriel in his first match. They insult him, calling him a brat still sucking his mother's teats, and mocking his nickname, Good Boy. Luca hears their taunts and doesn't like the name, but he stays composed, listening to their jeers. The crowd is rowdy, shouting things like, "Who let this guy in here?" and asking if he's trying to get himself killed. They cheer, excited at the prospect of a slaughter, their dark desires for flesh and gore fueling the arena's chaotic energy. Luca absorbs their disdain, thinking that they must truly want to see him dismembered and mutilated. But instead of being discouraged, he feels oddly comforted. He realizes that this atmosphere, filled with hostility and bloodlust, feels like home. As he flaps his shirt and with a grin, he wonders how the losers of the slums have been. Back in the past, Luca could not remember ever feeling full as a child. Officials from the Empire would stop by the orphanage twice a month to deliver supplies, but the principal would sell more than half of them to line his own pockets. For the children in the orphanage, starvation was a natural part of life. Even when he was starving, Luca never stopped training. He read every dusty, neglected book he could find and lifted rusty chunks of iron to strengthen his muscles. Other kids mocked him, asking why he worked so hard, claiming it was a waste of energy that would only make him hungrier. Luca would always reply that he worked hard because, when he was strong, he could get more food even when he was hungry. From that day on, Luca understood the harsh truth. The strong eat the weak. He grasped the laws of the world far better than the other children, believing it was natural for the strong to be full while the weak starved. When he stole food from other kids, they cried and shouted, telling him he was just like them. They mocked him, saying if he were truly different, he would have been placed in a single-digit orphanage. At the end of the day, they reminded him, he was still from the lowest floor. But Luca didn't care. He continued eating, ignoring their cries, thinking to himself that the losers' complaints were not his concern. At the age of 12, he underwent the second aptitude test, earning a spot on the list of potential Imperial Guard trainees. By the time he was 15, he officially became an Imperial Guard trainee. He ridiculed the other orphans in his mind, believing they could never comprehend the life he now led. Luca hoped he would never meet them again, dismissing them as losers. For most of his time as a trainee, he forgot about the orphanage, believing he would never have to return. But now, standing in the ring, he found himself back in the same harsh world he had once escaped. As his opponent, Gabriel, entered the arena, the crowd erupted, shouting Gabriel's name. Gabriel laughed loudly, mocking the situation, saying Alif must have smoked something strong to pair him with a brat like this. Still, he didn't mind as long as he got paid. Luca studied Gabriel carefully, noting that all his limbs came from different manufacturers, showing no regard for symmetry or balance. Gabriel's spine was curved, likely from the strain of excessive modifications. The parts of his flesh in contact with the metal were inflamed, suggesting chronic pain that probably required constant painkillers. Despite this, Luca could tell Gabriel was strong. Gabriel smirked and got fired up, asking Luca how he dared to stare at him like that. Luca thought to himself that Gabriel's body was modified solely for the purpose of becoming stronger, regardless of the cost. Gabriel bent down slightly to look Luca in the face, commenting that Luca didn't look too bad, and suggesting he serve him for a night. Luca chuckled and replied that he guesses he will need a servant from now on. After all, he was going to become a cripple today. His words cause Gabriel's eyes to pop out, and he turns back, mentioning that he will bash him into the ground until he is begging to be his servant. On the other hand, Aleph, being excited as the miniature version of the killer be killed, begins thinking if the boy will be crushed or will triumph. Kinyuan is also sitting in the audience as the show starts now. Luke thinks that Gabriel's body is modified solely for combat, and he is using non-combat parts, which means he will die instantly if he gets hit. As Gabriel gets in position to punch him with full power, Luke dodges the attack, and the floor is blown apart with the force. Then Luke tries to kick Gabriel, which causes Gabriel to chuckle as it was just a ticklish kick for him. Luca smirked, knowing that if it was his normal body, Gabriel would have exploded like a fruit. He then leaped backward. He then looks around, realizing the stadium is crammed, so he can't keep running away. He knew all of Gabriel's attacks were lethal, while his does almost no damage. Even the audience isn't on his side, as they shout at him to stop playing hide and seek and curse him to die already so they can see the next match. Luke is left thinking further about what Kinyuan wanted from him when he brought him here, remembering Kinyuan's words, that he should be satisfied with what he has. He reflects that wishing for something he doesn't have won't solve anything, and praying won't make a gun drop from the sky. No matter how little he has, he needs to fight with it. He realizes that Kinyuan took his limbs from him but left his eyes, which means Kinyuan doesn't expect him to overpower Gabriel with sheer strength. So, he moves toward Gabriel and punches him. His eyes pop out as he realizes that Arki's combat is about using what one has to its full potential. He uses his eyes to analyze Gabriel's full body, guessing that Gabriel's fists are like destructive cannons. The small tremors in his shoulders are the triggers. The direction of his gaze is the barrel. The length of his arm is the range, and it's quite slow to prepare compared to a real gun and its trajectory. This makes it obvious. Now, as Gabriel's punch is near his face, Luke dodges, surprising everyone in the audience, including Kinyuan. Kinyuan thinks Luke is a genius, as he has already experienced Arki's combat with his own talent. Now, Kinyuan believes Luke should show him his full potential. As Luke starts gaining the lead, Gabriel gets fired up, and the audience is shocked at how Gabriel is losing to him. Luke realizes that his concentration is better than ever. It's so good that he can fully predict Gabriel's attacks, so he wonders if he can do exactly the same thing Kinyuan did to him. Luke then jumps onto Gabriel's arm, using his hands for support, and attacks him from behind. Before Gabriel can react, Luke kicks him in the face and sent him flying. Luca smirked, mentioning that now he is getting excited, understanding that this is how Kinyuan was observing him. Gabriel, now furious, shouts that he doesn't know what sorcery Luke has used. Enraged, he throws another punch, declaring that Luke's feeble attacks won't work on him. Luke dodges the attack, grabs Gabriel's face, and asks if he really thinks his attacks won't work. As Luke slides his leg, he mentions that while he lacks pure power, he just needs to make up for it with something else. He jumps upside down, grabs Gabriel's neck and cracks it. Luke then jumps down, looking at the shocked faces of the audience. He tells them they can stay there, wasting their time waiting for his demise forever, but he will just climb higher until their words can't even reach him. Luca put on his cap, knowing that if it was a battleground with many variables, he would not have been able to concentrate as much. So the reason he won is because the arena is a controlled environment. That's why he was able to concentrate well enough to predict Gabriel's moves. The crowd, still surprised, watched Luca leave the arena. Luca now had no choice but to admit that Kinyuan is a great teacher. Kinyuan, who was waiting, congratulated Luca for the nice work, then welcomed him into his induction into Arki's Victima. Luca told Kinyuan he realized that accepting one's situation doesn't mean losing. Kinyuan then stretched out his hand to give Luca something. Luca, thinking it was a credit chip, questioned if he was getting a payout for the fight, but Kinyuan told him that wasn't the case. He gave him money for Gabriel's hospital bills, and told Luca to go give it to him, saying it's not a bad idea to show generosity as long as it doesn't make him a fool. Luca countered, saying he wants to be a soldier and warrior, not a good Samaritan. But Kinyuan patted Luca on the head, telling him he's quite naive regarding interpersonal relationships. With a sharp stare, he told Luca that the kindness he's talking about is not charity, but an investment, something he should build up for the future when he can make good use of it. He added that the same thing happened today, as he reaped his investments in Torah. While leaving, he told Luca not to forget that creating an advantageous environment for oneself is the mark of a good soldier. As Kinyuan left, Luca realized he was deeply mistaken about Kinyuan. He thought Kinyuan was teaching him because he was impressed by his talent and felt a connection since they both came from the gutters. He now undoubtedly misjudged Kinyuan. Luca now knows that one day, Kinyuan will definitely seek to reap what he has invested in him, in a way that he cannot refuse. At a certain hospital, Gabriel was undergoing treatment. After analyzing his body, the doctor told him that the possible signal wavelengths are too short to be compatible with his cybernetic body, and his current body draws so much power that it'll inevitably cause small problems or freeze-ups. He recommended Gabriel use Xionic Hyperlindel No. 9 instead. Gabriel, shocked, voiced his disagreement, saying there's no way he could afford it since it's the newest model. He then asked the doctor if he was trying to rip him off, since everyone else seems to walk around fine with Garbotech. The doctor adjusted his glasses and told Gabriel that those people walking fine with Garbotech did not undergo as heavy modifications as he did, so if he had at least considered compatibility, an older model would have sufficed. Gabriel argued, saying he was poor back then, so he just slapped on whatever he could get. The doctor then suggested buying his current limbs and attaching new ones according to his budget. Gabriel agreed, but told the doctor to at least use combat models. The doctor told him that wasn't possible because, with the money he had, he could only afford used goods for casual use models. Gabriel couldn't agree to this since he had spent so much on the mods. Surprisingly, Luca entered the room and nonchalantly asked Gabriel how he was doing, and commented that it's nice to see him as energetic as ever. Seeing Luca, Gabriel became furious, determined to kill him and make sure he'd die at all costs, but Luca wasn't scared. Instead, he approached Gabriel and told him to remember that he warned him before the fight that he was going to cripple him. Gabriel, speechless and engulfed in fear, froze. Luca then calmed down as he remembered Kinuan's words, though he taunted Gabriel instinctively. Luca turned to the doctor and told him that the Hyper-Lindel number 9 he mentioned, he'd like to pay for it. He then asked if the amount in his chip would suffice. The doctor replied yes. Surprised, Gabriel asked Luca what the hell he thought he was doing. Luca sarcastically told him, "Can't you see I'm paying your bills?" Still surprised, Gabriel asked him why he was paying his bills, to which Luca replied that he just felt like it. Hearing this, Gabriel went speechless, realizing it was the mercy of the victor. He then asked Luca for his name. Luca told him, prompting Gabriel to confidently say that if Luca ever needs his help, he should take it as him repaying his debt. Luca was speechless, realizing the emotions he felt now weren't bad either. Hours later, back at Akrisha physical training grounds, standing in the arena were Ile and Luca. Ile charged out, then attacked Luca with a kick, but Luca easily blocked it with his hand. Using the same trick that Kinuan used on him, he easily countered Ile, leaving him helpless midair, then sent him flying. Ile sat down, groaning in pain. Minutes later, they both sat down. Ile then asked Luca if he learned the Archi's combat method from instructor Kinuan. Luca replied, yeah. Ile asked if the techniques weren't something thugs used. It involves stuff like holding glass shards between your fingers or chucking dirt at the enemy's eyes. Luca didn't disagree, though it was hard to believe, but Kinuan told him that's exactly what it is. With this, Ile told Luca he can't dream of beating him in hand-to-hand combat anymore. Luca smirked and told Ile that he's the only trainee who can still put up a fight. Luca thought to himself that the experience in the Colosseum was enough to shake the foundation of his idea of combat. It's as if all the techniques he had practiced until now had been condensed into a single drop of knowledge. Ile, speechless, realized that Luca looked happy today. He then asked Luca to help him out if he wasn't busy. Luca replied, of course. The scene shifts to the Akrisha Imperial Guard trainee barracks visiting room. Now in front of Luca were the flustered Ile and the Ramones girl. Ile immediately apologized to Luca, saying his family had always been on good terms with the Ramones family, so he couldn't refuse her. She asked Luca for the reason why he had been avoiding her, since she had applied to visit a number of times. Luca immediately replied that it's because he is not interested in her, so he hoped she'd see that as his way of refusing. Ile jokingly told Luca he should at least say it nicely. But Luca told him to shut up since the situation alone pissed him off. She looked at Luca, then asked him what he hated so much about her. As Luca drank his tea, he told her he had no time to meet a woman. Unlike her, someone like him who's from an orphanage has no way of climbing back up once he loses his footing. If that's the case, she told him, it would benefit you if you got closer to me. But Luca told her that she didn't seem to understand what he was saying. If he were to rely on her power as a noble, it would mean he could lose everything at her command. He intended to climb up with his own abilities. But she countered, telling Luca that it's strange for him to claim he doesn't want to rely on nobles despite being close to Ile. Luca refuted her by telling her he interacted with Ile because he's a friend and someone he can entrust his life to in combat, not because he's from the Karthika family. She then asked him if he wasn't going to give her a single chance. Speechless for a moment, as he stood, he told her he had no intention to, so he hoped she wouldn't visit him again. He then left. On his way out, Ile came rushing towards him, telling Luca he didn't need to be so harsh, but Luca told him that if he wasn't harsh, she would have clung on. Ile agreed, but asked why Luca disliked Lillian so strongly. He added that they could meet up a few times and build a bond. Luca told him the reason was that he couldn't tell why she liked him. It didn't really make sense that she was approaching a nobody like him just because Claude, who's dead, said good things about him, so she must be scheming something. Ile, still insistent, told Luca that if he was scared, he could take things slow. But Luca interrupted and told Ile that he knows he likes her. He could tell from his gaze, breaths, and how panicked he was just now. Luca knew this because Archi's victima let him see all sorts of things now. With a sharp stare and serious tone, he told Ile that he's not interested, and if Ile likes her, he should cut the bullshit and shoot his shot. Ile was speechless. As Luca left the room, he murmured that it's impossible for him to be with Lillian. In the lava department, where the whole atmosphere is filled with volcanic fire and smog, Lukai is sitting on the edge of a cliff with the instructor. He is meditating, believing that the training he is undergoing is focused on remaining calm regardless of the situation around him. Without opening his eyes, he asks the instructor how he would have resolved the fight if it had broken out in the gang's office. The instructor repeated what he had said in the past. He would tell him if he won. Lukai sweating heavily, remembering how back then armed thugs were waiting inside and outside the office. At the time, he couldn't see a way to get out of the situation unscathed without a weapon. He is eager to know what the instructor would have done in that situation. Kinuan smiles, mentioning that he would have hidden under the table when the fight started. His reply shocks Luke, as Aleph and his thugs all had guns. If his first move was to hide, he would lose any chance to attack. Kinuan explains that he knew Luca had taken the opportunity to confront them, even if it meant taking a few bullets. Luke asks what Kinuan would have done if he had decided to run away or hide from the situation. Kinuan smiles, saying he knew Luca was planning to take Aleph hostage and seize his gun. He asks if he was right, mentioning that Luca had been trained to maximize his aggressiveness and had likely already imagined how to take them down. Kinuan's accurate guess shocks Luke, and he opens his eyes to look at him. Kinuan further explains that if Luca had taken Aleph hostage, the most likely outcome would have been that both of them got shot. Down there, it wasn't unusual for gang bosses to be replaced, so all Luke's efforts would have done was give the thugs an excuse to kill their boss. Kinuan smirks, mentioning that once Luca became the target of their guns, he would have taken them down and escaped with him through a secret passage. Luke is stunned, not only because Kinuan had predicted his actions, but also because he had considered an escape route Luca hadn't even imagined. As Kinuan stands up, he mentions that in a language no longer spoken, Archis means keen eyes, and Victima refers to those who use all possible brain resources to amplify insight. He tells Luca to remember that. As Luca stands, he asks Kinuan if the problem with his brain is a side effect of pushing it to its limits. Suddenly, his eyes widen, and he shouts, asking, "Doesn't that mean if he equips the Legion he won't be able to use Archis Victima?" Kinuan chuckles, saying Luca is sharper than he thought, as he expected him to take a couple more months to figure that out. Kinuan explains that Luca will be bestowed a Legion once he becomes an Imperial Guard. The Legion is a full-body mechanical armor created with the best technology of the Empire. It is cybernetic and utilizes high-bandwidth memory signals. On top of CPUs that provide assistance, it requires all the brain's resources to function. This means there won't be extra resources to spend on Archis Victima while wearing the Legion. Luca, burning with anger, clenches his fists, accusing Kinuan of hiding this from him, knowing how he would react. He says if he'd known Archis Victima couldn't be used with the Legion, he would never have learned it. Luca blames himself for being too dull and starts walking away. Kinuan sighs, asking if this is how it ends. Luca thanks him sarcastically for the time he wasted teaching him. As Luca leaves, Kinuan calls out, saying he is always welcome to return if he changes his mind. Luca grits his teeth, burning with anger. Luca enters the room as the man mentions that it has been 3 months and he has been quite busy, so he hasn't had a chance to meet the trainees. He is the Akricia's Imperial Guard Chief Centurion, Halis Custoria. Luca thinks the reason he has been summoned today might be related to a rebellion, as Ile mentioned. When the chief asks Luca about his well-being, Luca replies that he has been training on his own since he hasn't been assigned to a mission for a while now. The chief says that he won't be receiving any proper missions for a while, as he is already skilled enough to act as a real force for them. Luca thanks the chief for the praise. Suddenly, the chief mentions that he has heard Luca has been interacting with the instructor, Kinuan, quite often. The mention of the instructor causes Luca to freak out, and a wave of fear washes over him. He begins to understand why the chief has called him here. He thinks that the higher-ups have probably figured out everything, from his visits to the lower sector's black market to his participation in the Colosseum. Suddenly, the chief asks him if he has been practicing Archis Victima under instructor Kinuan. Luca replies that he isn't practicing it anymore. The chief guesses that Luca was the one who quit, and asks if he is right. Luca, surprised, asks him how he knew. The chief chuckles, mentioning that since Archis Victima cannot be used with a Legion, he felt it was meaningless for someone in the Imperial Guard. He asks Luca if he had already figured it out, explaining that those who lack talent are thrown out by Kinuan, and those with talent soon realize they have no reason to learn it. That is why Kinuan is the sole user of Archis Victima in the Imperial Guard. Luca, shocked, asks the chief if he wants him to continue learning it. The chief smiles and says that, to be exact, he wants Luca to continue to maintain good terms with Kinuan. For that purpose, he should continue learning Archis Victima, and this is an order. Luca is freaking out, physically unsettled, unable to understand if the chief centurion is wary of instructor Kinuan. He cannot figure out why the chief is on such high alert against a soldier who has retired from combat. However, Luca knows he can't ask questions, as his life might be at risk if he learns the details. So, he agrees with the chief, stating that he will continue to learn Archis Victima. The chief stares at him, telling him to keep in mind that he is being watched, further stating that Luca is the type to climb high. After a while, Luca goes to Kinuan. Kinuan says he didn't expect him to return so quickly. After a slight pause, he adds that since he told Luca to come back anytime, he won't ask any more questions. Luca thanks Kinuan for taking him back, thinking that Kinuan probably didn't want to teach him again but had agreed quite easily. Luca then asks the instructor why they are in the lower sector today. Looking at the masks around them, he asks if kids these days still like such things, mentioning how, when he was younger, he used to spend time staring at them here. Kinuan calls out to the shopkeeper, who is busy reading his newspaper, and tells him to let them search for what they want themselves since he has no clue about toys. Kinuan then asks the shopkeeper to give him all the toys in the shop, also asking if they will deliver them. The shopkeeper is shocked, and even Luca is confused, unable to understand why Kinuan is buying all these toys. After a while, they are standing in front of the lower sector's 47th orphanage. Kinuan tells him to put the box down in the inner field and then take a break. Luca agrees. Suddenly, someone calls out to him from behind. As Luca turns, he sees Gabriel holding a box, shouting at him, asking why he called him for something like this. Gabriel continues yelling, asking if he looks like a bellboy to him. Luca gets closer and explains that Gabriel was the one who said he could ask him for help, and since the shopkeeper wouldn't have delivered the toys here, his help was greatly appreciated. Gabriel shouts back, explaining that he meant for Luca to call him for something bigger, maybe a fight against another gang. Luca smirks, calling him an idiot. stating that he doesn't need his help in a fight. Gabriel agrees with him. Luca stares at Gabriel, thinking that his new spinal implant has significantly improved his body's balance. It seems the money spent on it didn't go to waste. Gabriel notices Kinuan entering the building and asks Luca who he is. Gabriel further mentions that if Kinuan is so infamous that even Aleph couldn't stand up to him, he should have heard about him. Luca replies that if he were in Gabriel's place, he would keep his nose out of it unless he wanted to lose his head. Luca then thinks about how Kinuan grew up here and how he is doing charity because he managed to escape this place. Suddenly, children run toward them with excitement, thanking them for the gifts. Luca notices two kids fighting over a gift but doesn't interfere. Instead, he thinks that they should resolve it with power, as nothing in life is fair. To him, they should strengthen themselves if they want something, as the world isn't generous enough for everyone to be happy. Kinuan approaches Luca and asks him to talk with him at the back. While leaning against the fence, Kinuan mentions that he stops by the lower sector from time to time. He adds that the pay isn't very high, and judging by how chubby the principal of the orphanage is, he's likely smuggling supplies out. Luca asks Kinuan if he grew up here. Kinuan replies that he has forgotten such things long ago. He says he just stops by nearby orphanages occasionally, and might have visited the one he grew up in. Luca stares at Kinuan, thinking that this sight of him makes him look like a retired soldier, an old soldier stripped of his former glory, with a nervous system broken down because it couldn't withstand the overload, causing damage to his brain. Luca wonders if that might be his own future, but he thinks he might be too lucky to live that long. Kinuan then told Luca they should get to the point. He questions Luca about who ordered him to come back to him. Luca freaks out, his eyes widening with shock. Kinuan pressed further, asking if it was Captain Hylas. He stares at Luca with a dangerous look in his eyes. After the strange air of silence, Luca asks Kinuan what he means, moving his eyes slightly, thinking that he should not look directly into Kinuan's eyes. With Kinuan's insight, every single action he makes could serve as a clue. He further wonders how Kinuan knew it was an order from the chief, and how much he is already aware of. Luca also begins to consider whether Kinuan is hiding something dangerous, and something big enough for the chief to keep tabs on him. If that is true, Kinuan might decide to eliminate him right now. Luca's hands start to tremble, and he begins preparing to attack when Kinuan calmly tells him to relax if he values his life. Kinuan adds that even if Luca attacks him with all his strength, it would be hard to restrain him without killing him. Luca, shivering and sweating, tells Kinuan that the only thing he can say is that he is a soldier of the Empire. Kinuan shifts his stance, saying that Luca knows so little he doesn't even know which direction to stick to. He further explains that he doesn't intend to blame him, as it's only natural for a soldier to follow their superior's orders. He tells Luca that he is truly the ideal soldier the Empire seeks. Luca is shocked and unable to utter a single word. Kinuan continues, stating that the first time Luca came to him, did he really think it was of his own free will? Kinuan reveals that when Luca performed projectile trajectory manipulation without an assisting processor, the higher-ups began making their preparations. Luca became the first person with the potential to learn Archi's Victema like Kinuan. He might have thought that he came to Kinuan of his own accord, seeking strength after the incident in Korra, but in truth, it was thanks to the Empire's calculations that he came to meet Kinuan. Luca, overwhelmed, tells himself not to be swayed by Kinuan's words. He tries to convince himself that he met a powerful foe during his mission and realized he needed more power. That's why he dug through the records of instructors and found someone to help him. He insists it was all his own free will, and he was the one who made the choice. Kinuan counters, saying that every man in the world is someone's slave, and they either know it or refuse to acknowledge it. He smiles, remarking that Luca probably wants to run away from the truth right now, as he is still young. Kinuan then walks away, telling Luca to head back, and that if he wants to report to Hylas, he should feel free to do so. Even now, Luca doesn't believe Kinuan's words, but as Kinuan said, Chief Centurion Hylas wanted him to continue learning Archi's Victema. He tries to reassure himself not to doubt the Empire, believing all he wants is success. He encouraged himself to ignore Kinuan's words and not think about them further. However, a lingering doubt within him stirs, and he questions whether even his desire to succeed is truly his own. The scene shifts to the simulation training room, where Luca sits silently on a bench, holding his head in frustration. He couldn't bring himself to report Kinuan to the Chief Centurion that day. Even if he had, they might have made him undergo a psychological exam to check for signs of dangerous ideology. Given his current confusion, his results would likely show a lower scope than before. The Empire does not forgive those with dangerous ideologies, and in the worst-case scenario, they could dismiss him from his position as an Imperial guard and send him to forced labor camps. Luca realizes that Kinuan must have known he would hesitate to report him. If Luca truly wants to inform Hylas, he will need to prepare himself to pass the psychological exam. To do that, he must meet Kinuan again. Suddenly, the door of the simulation capsule opens and Ile comes out of it, grinding his teeth in pain. He sighs and breathes heavily when, all of a sudden, his eyes pop out as someone throws a bottle toward him. He catches it, and Luca asks if he does the training as well, noting that he's starting to see him in another light. Ile smiles, mentioning that losing to Luca might have rubbed him the wrong way. He asks if Luca came all the way here to cheer his friend on, adding that he'd be delighted if that were the case. Luca replies that he's right, as he has a request. As Ile sits down, Luca brings up how Ile once mentioned that prestigious families rigged the aptitude tests. He asks if this information is accurate. Ile replies that it's a well-known secret, though the unqualified never make it past the training. Luca turns toward him and asks how he passed the psychological portion of the aptitude test, further inquiring if he has a secret he's willing to share. Ile stares at him and states, "Do you know it's an incredibly dangerous thing to ask me?" Luca replies that he's checked and confirmed nobody else is around, adding that he's doing this for the sake of the Empire. Ilay sighs and says he won't ask why Luca needs to know, as he might have already guessed. He admits there is a way. Luca asks him what way he is talking about. Ilay closes his eyes and mentions that there's no method other than creating a simpler version of one's ego to interact with the outside world while placing the true ego as an observer within. He explains that essentially, they are sealing the parts of their ego they want to hide internally. That's how someone would be able to pass the psychological exam. Luca asks what he's talking about. Ilay, now excited, replies that there are instances of normal people losing their memories or experiencing personality changes due to trauma, and that this is essentially the same thing, but done consciously. Luca is equally shocked, not fully understanding if it's even possible, but he guesses Ilay wouldn't be telling him this if it weren't. Ilay says that their brains live in a constant state of confusion, and if someone keeps acting like a loyal soldier, the ego of being a loyal soldier will really develop on the surface of their mind. He explains that in his case, 2 months before the aptitude test began, he woke up every day and gave his prayer of gratitude to the emperor, mimicking what his father did. Ilay adds that the only issue is that doing it for too long might destabilize one's true ego, leading to a risk of forgetting who they truly are. Luca looks at him with shock and asks where the hell he learned something like that. Internally, he thinks that, in any case, if this is the method, he doesn't need to pretend to be someone else. He only needs to act like his past self, the one who received the high score on the psychological exam, the version of himself from before he met Ilay and Kinuan. Ilay turns to Luca and tells him that he doesn't know what he's trying to do, but he should be careful, as tampering with the psychological exam is extremely dangerous. Luca looks at him and mentions that he never thought a day would come when he'd hear that from him. After a slight pause, Luca's phone starts ringing, and in the next moment, he finds himself standing with Kinuan in front of a building in a lower sector. Kinuan informs him that today's training is live action and quite simple, further mentioning that the building is rather well built for a gang. Luca is surprised, noting that Kinuan is treating him the same as always, as if the incident at the orphanage never happened, which, ironically, makes him feel even worse. Kinuan gives him an ultimatum, to take down every gang member inside in just 20 seconds. Luca agrees. Standing in front of the gate, he smashes the password pad with his hand. The people inside the room immediately become alert. As he walks in, a guy stares at him, walking toward him and asking what he wants. Commenting that he doesn't look like a customer, Luca observes him, thinking that one idiot has walked right up with a gun. Based on his observations, there are 3 armed thugs, one guy who appears to be their leader, and he senses someone hiding in the bathroom. Suddenly, the guy points his gun at Luca's head, stating that he wasn't planning to bust a kid's head open this early in the morning. But before he can even pull the trigger, Luca punches him in an upward direction, sending him flying over the heads of the other 3 gang members. As fog rises from his gloves, Luca remarks that a lot of things have been going on in his mind, so it's time to let off some steam. The guy is smashed into the ceiling, and the gun falls from his hand. The other gangsters look at him in shock before raising their guns toward Luca's head. Luca catches the falling gun, points it at them, and shoots them directly in the hands. Suddenly, the guy who appears to be their leader points his gun at Luca and fires a shot. However, his aim doesn't come close to hitting Luca. Luca remarks that it's strange how people with such poor aim manage to make money by killing others. Just then, the bathroom door opens, and a half-naked man steps out, asking his members what's going on. He freezes in shock, unable to comprehend what has just happened. Luca points the gun at him, telling him that if he were in his place, he would knock himself unconscious because he wouldn't want to lose those hard-earned limbs. The man sneakily looked at his electric weapon on his hand. The next thing that happened was a shock sound, and the man was on the floor electrocuted. Luca comments that he can still sense someone else in the bathroom. And as Luca enters the bathroom, he becomes shocked to see the girl hostage, and as he comes out, Kinuan praises him with a smile for finishing his task within just 12 seconds and claps for him, saying he did a good job. As Luca is coming out with the girl in his arm, Luca grinds his teeth, looking inside, asking Kinuan if they can't just kill them. But Kinuan didn't agree, asking him not to interfere anymore with the rules of this place. Either way, there are countless people in the world who lack the power to defend themselves, asking him if he is well aware of what happened to them. Luca stares at the woman she is holding, thinking that she is suffering from this fate because she did not possess the strength to defy it. And meanwhile, he himself has struggled for power to be there. He is just so he doesn't end up like her. Normally, he called people like her idiots who failed to grasp the opportunity offered by the Empire. But at that moment, he could feel nothing but disgust about the structure of the society he was living in. After that day, Kinuan continued to take him to the lower sector, and he pushed him into fights without prior information. And according to him, he wasn't doing that to make him learn how to win. But the lesson for him to grasp was how well he optimized the situation he was thrown into, since identifying the opponent's capability is the rule of thumb, of course. And he needed to go beyond that by interpreting and judging the best course of action. The instructor continued to send him into the fight without giving any instructions. The scene shifts to the repair shop when the girl welcomes them. As soon as Kinuan and Luca enter, Kinuan calls her Gilda and asks her to get him a cup of coffee, a long black with a layer of oil on it. Gilda looks at Luca and asks him if he wants a cup of milk, but he tells her that he also wants a coffee, but no oil on it. He then looks at the instructor, asking him if there was a need to stop at the Gilda shop. Kinuan tells him that she was the woman he saved, so doesn't he feel a sense of pride when he looks at her working so hard? Gilda is the woman Luca saved from thugs a few days ago. She told them her story, and it looks like she had been kidnapped and endured all sorts of horrible things for several months. Thankfully, her mind seemed intact, and she was able to return to everyday life after that incident. As for the reason she was kidnapped, it was her friend who took money from the gangsters, hid at her place, and she ended up being kidnapped by the gangsters' pursuers. However, her friend, who was the root of the issue, is already dead, and as she becomes busy preparing their coffees, Kinuan tells Luca that she is the child from an orphanage, and she had a talent in engineering and mechanics as a child. So he even funded her education and kept the whole thing anonymous, though she won't even know. Luca asked him if he was acquainted with her from the start, when suddenly someone approaches them, and as Luca turns to look, it's Gabriel, looking at Luca with shock, asking him what he is doing here. As Gilda comes with their coffees, Gabriel asks her for the beer. She asked him not to drink it, as his neural system is already strained from hard work. So, how about he pass on the alcohol? And the story of how Gabriel and she met is that after they rescued her, Kinuan introduces her to Gabriel, and Gabriel becomes her bodyguard, and she becomes his mechanic. Luca looks at Gabriel and asks him to listen to his mechanic, but Gabriel did not agree, mentioning that it's just one beer. As Gabriel sits down, he shouts in Luca's ears, asking him if he is the one who is poking beehives left and right, asking him what is he even thinking, as the gang bosses have already started to talk about making a move against him. And if they proceed with that, even he can't ensure Gilda's safety. Kinuan asks him not to worry about it, as they won't be visiting this place for a while now. Gilda looks sad and asks him how long does he mean. Kinuan, while taking a sip, replies that it can be some months or even a few years. He doesn't know. Luca listens to it, thinking that he guesses he won't be able to come to the lower sector for a long time now, and he can't even come here by himself, as his superior won't allow a trainee to leave by themselves. He looks at Gabriel and Gilda, thinking that this could be the last time he sees them. And as he sees her smiling face, he is surprised, as even after such a terrible incident, she comes back to her life and starts working, and Gabriel continues to take on more risks working in his field. So while lifting the cup, he asked himself not to feel bad for them, trying to realize that not coming here for a while might be the best thing for him. Taking a sip of the coffee, thinking about why people like such bitter stuff, hours later, at the chief's office, Luca gave the chief the information of all that happened with Kinuan. The chief remarked that Kinuan continues to perform peculiar activities. Kinuan became a trainee at a rather late age. He would normally never have been granted the opportunity, but at that time the Empire needed to accept impurities if it was necessary. Since at that time chaos unfolded everywhere, even he is not sure as a chief what kind of person Kinuan is, as when he was just a fresh recruit, he was already one of the key members of the Imperial Guard, and they presume he specialized in discreet secret operations. Luca is shocked as the chief does not even know about his records. The chief tells him that no matter what, it appears to be true that Kinuan has taken a liking to him, as he has sent trainees to him before, but they never lasted long, so it's me and he is excellent, but he is also in a spot vulnerable to negative influences. He then clicks the buttons on the table, telling him that a psychological exam will be scheduled for him, so he should make sure to receive it. Luca bows down, stating that he will take it, thinking that it's happened as he expected it to be. The chief covers his face with his hand, telling Luca that he will be frank, as there are two outcomes for trainees who receive this type of mission. They are either eliminated to keep a secret, or rise to the heart of the Imperial Guard as a reward for their contribution, and he hopes that he will end up as the latter. Luca tells him that he merely follows the orders given to him, and if this operation ends well, he trusts that the chief will vouch for him. The chief's right eye turned red, and he smirked. He mentioned that if his results are satisfactory, he will stand behind him. To be exact, he will adopt him as his son. Luca is surprised by his words, as he even takes his name with his own surname and laughs, saying it sounds quite nice. After leaving the office, Luca couldn't still believe his ears about the chief wanting to take him as his son, as the chief belongs to the Custoria family, and it is one of the most renowned families of the Empire. The next moment, he is sitting on the psychological test chair, and the bot informs him that they will begin the psychological exam. The bot told Luca that he detected joy in his expression, questioning if something nice happened, but Luca told the bot it's none of his business, so he should start. On the other side, Ile is punching the punching bag with extraordinary power, not stopping, and kicking it fiercely. His sweat is dropping on the floor, and he's completely tired. He breathes heavily after delivering some final punches, then takes out his ointment and applies it to his arm. He sighs in pain. In the next scene, he is sitting next to Luca when Luca mentions that it looks like he practices until his joints wear out, asking if he is really the Ile he knows. Ile asks him if he passed the psychological exam, and Luca replies that he did, thanks to his help. He then asks Ile what's wrong and offers to help him with anything. Ile mentions that he can't tell him about it right now, but that soon he will ask him for a favor, asking if Luca will be okay with that. Luca looks at him and says that if Ile finds himself in danger during combat, he will come to rescue him, even if he has to risk his life to do it. Ile smiles and thanks him, further telling him that, as he said, he will tell him about it soon, and hopes it doesn't go the way he thinks. Luca thinks that he would be lying if he said he wasn't curious about Ile's favor, but he didn't feel like going out of his way to figure it out. Now that he had done well on the psychological exam and even had the chief's trust, his goal had shifted to becoming the son of the Custoria family, and at that moment, that was the only thing lingering in his mind. The scene shifts to the chief telling the soldiers that from this moment, they will operate under a special military order, and its purpose is to suppress the rebels who have risen against the Empire. The rebel force consists of 3 families, led by the Ramones family. As soon as Luca hears about the Ramones family, he becomes shocked and turns his face to look at Ile, remembering Lillian, thinking that he has figured out Ile's favor now. The soldiers get on the tanks, and they enter. Luca introduces himself as the leader of the 21 Stone Suppression Army platoon. The other soldiers salute him, calling him the platoon leader. Luca looks at them, thinking that the Imperial Guard trainees will be made to serve the role of platoon leaders, and the higher-ups intend to use even an uprising as a means of training. Anyway, the platoon is divided into 2 squads, totaling 27 people. in which the vice platoon leader, Sergeant Kodrak, is his aide. Considering they are still inexperienced, the suppression army mostly consists of experienced veterans, and each of them knows that they are being used as a tool for the trainees' training. This makes it unlikely for them to follow the orders of a superior whose ability they cannot trust. Despite that, Lucas still has to be able to take control and command them himself. So now what should he do? He couldn't understand well. He had thought of two options. The first one is to leave things to Sergeant Kodrak, and even if he gives vague orders, Kodrak will take care of it. That would be the standard choice. Anyway, he told them with vigor that he's superior to all of them, so he asked that they follow his orders as is. Disobedience will be considered a punishable offense. The second method Luca thinks of is to nip the resistance they have towards him in the bud and crush them with force. Luca's words really triggered the soldiers, prompting Kodrak to worriedly ask Luca to have a private word with him. But Luca pulled Kodrak's hand from his shoulder and threw him to the soldiers. He says, "You dare lay your hands on a superior without permission? Do you take me for a fool because of my age?" He then walks forward, telling the soldiers that he is from the lower sector, just like them, and that he even grew up in a double-digit orphanage when he was young. Further, asking them if they know why there is such a difference between their social standing despite all of this. He looks at Kodrak and tells them with a heavy voice that it's because he is immensely superior to all of them. He tells them that they may not understand it now, but they will soon, as he is a better platoon leader than anyone they will ever meet. As he backs up, Kodrak stands up and apologizes to him for his behavior, mentioning that he will be more careful now. Luca looks at him, thinking that Kodrak's understanding is astute, and he realized he didn't pick the easy way out. The scene shifts to the Imperial Army outpost, where all of the people are gathered together. Yahello covered his eyes, asking Luca if he could not hold back his temper and beat up one of his platoon members. Luca tells him that he just did it because he felt that his aide was going to treat him as a child. Yahello says that they are children in their eyes. Luca mentions that it's not right, but if he acts that nicely, his underlings won't give him any respect. The chief comes on the stage and tells the soldiers that the rebels are stationed at the relic site of the arcane civilization, and all arcane fortress operations are under their command now, and this entire side is surrounded by 2 walls, and there is a high-density force barrier acting as a dome protecting the fort. Turrets, presumed to be arcane weapons, are positioned to shoot down aerial targets, and there are 5 of those turrets. Further informing them that the 11th Armored Brigade is tasked with leading the attack to destroy them, the rest of the army will rush to inform all sides. Luca thinks that the Armored Brigade used full body armor for all its members. The Empire is using a large force in suppression. The chief then informs them that the operation begins at 1410 hours, which is in an hour and 30 minutes, so they should finish their preparation by then. After the meeting, Luca and Yahello come out, leaning by the wall. Luca mentions that he expected so, but they were just on the side, acting as support. Yahello mentions that it's of course, as they will not want them to actually die. Luca asks him how this is different from a picnic. Yahello tells him that he sounds like a warhawk right now, and after a few seconds, Yahello starts crying. As he was about to say something, Luca asks him if he is trying to talk about the Ramones family, telling him that he may be close to them, but there is nothing they can do. If he sides with those who have committed treason, his family will not be able to save him. Yahello states that he is not hoping for any miracles, but if somehow there is a chance, then he hopes to rescue Lillian at least. Luca approaches him and asks him if he loves her so much that he will put his life on the line. Yahello replies that she was his first love, but he doesn't bear any feelings for her now. Luca shouts at him, asking him why he tried to hook him up with his first love, when Yahello replies that she didn't want to marry a noble. Luca is getting fired up, and asks Yahello to get a grip on himself. He has overlooked his antics until now, but this crosses the line. Trying to save her is really dangerous, and he will be executed on the spot if he gets caught. He then walks away, asking him not to do anything stupid, and consider this as a warning. Yahello agrees and turns back. Luca turns to look at him, being sad, as the Arcane's victim forces him to know that it's a lie, and that fools plan to get her out at any cost. It doesn't matter whether Yahello accepts it or not. For his own sake, Lillian must die. Any hope that it happens amidst the chaos, any hopes and prayers that she never gets to meet Yahello alive, and that is his desperate wish. Time passed. Luca sat in the transport plane. He said to himself, all that matters is the head and chest. As long as those 2 areas are intact, soldiers of the Empire can't die. As long as you can breathe and blood is getting supplied to your brain, the Empire will revive you with their cybernetic technology. As he is sitting alone, Kodrak approaches him, and Luca asks him what he wants to say. He tells him that he is well aware of his capabilities and he checked the expertise of his superior thoroughly. Luca asks him what he wants to say. He replies that the thing he wants to say is that when they enter combat, he should please heed his words as he has served the Empire for 10 years. He may not be as capable as him, but his skills aren't worthless. Luca asks him not to worry about that, as he will listen to anyone if their suggestion is valid. Kodrak bows down and says thanks to him. Then, all the cars start moving towards the place, and a lot of Armored Brigade full-body mechanical armor models, Myrmidon, come out. Luca looks at them, thinking that they were the mass-produced full-body mechanical armor Myrmidon. All of the soldiers were looking from inside when Luca thinks that they were tasked with taking down the turrets, and then they will be stepping in. As the commencing fire starts, all of the Myrmidon jump up with full acceleration to attack the turrets, but after the first attack, the shield remained intact, and they were thrown back. They went back to attack and caused a large explosion. After a lot of explosions and attacks, they succeed. Luca looks at them with shock, thinking that they have successfully breached the fortress, and now it's up to whether they were able to neutralize the turrets or not. If they fail, then they will have to fight at a heavy disadvantage. According to the calculation of the strategic simulator, The estimated time until the turrets are neutralized is 1 minute after entry. If Myrmidon fails to take care of the turrets, the suppression forces will need to march in and bear the cost. Now, as they're about to lose, the soldiers are getting shocked. But after some minutes, the turrets have been neutralized, and the system orders them to proceed to the next stage of the operation. The soldiers become excited and happy. Luca now knows that the battlefield is a cruel and dangerous place, but it's also where men find joy in the adrenaline rush. And honestly, he loved that too. He too, as a human who derives a sense of accomplishment and joy from this wicked place. If he would have had no feeling, he would have gone insane a long time ago if he hadn't. So now it's time for him to put his capabilities to the test. Now, the plan consists of infantry being trained from all directions at once. Their superiors intend to leave no room for the rebels to escape. The subterranean tunnels of the arcane fortress are like a maze, and even the explored areas stretch several hundred meters deep. They have a map of the tunnels from a previous expedition of the ruins, but the rebels have modified the interior, so it's likely inaccurate. Now, as all the soldiers are running outside trying to save themselves from the explosions, Luca tells them that the rebels must have narrowed the entrance to the underground facilities to prevent Myrmidon from entering. So, they rush into the tunnel when Luca tells Kodrak that he will lead from here. But Kodrak tells him that it's a dangerous move in a place like this, and the likelihood of traps or an ambush is very high. Luca asks him if he is afraid of dealing with the consequences if he dies, and Kodrak replies, if he tells him honestly, he is. When Luca tells him that he doesn't care what happens after he dies, and whatever his pay is halved or not, is of no concern to him, he will say it again, he will lead, so they should follow him. He starts running. He knows by the expression of the guys behind him, and he feels a chill up his spine as if the men are ready to gun him down from behind. But he doesn't have time to worry about that. He needs to reach Lillian and eliminate her before Ile gets there, as Ile must also be in the tunnels right now, having entered from a different point. If he is willing to expand his troops to advance, he will get through in no time, and he can also do the same by sacrificing his men. But he can't allow his personal emotion to cost him the lives of the loyal soldiers. He will bear all the risk himself. Suddenly, Luca gets to the point where the missile is hanging up. Kodrak shouts to inform him, and in time, Luca gets the idea and cuts it down with his sword. He then thinks that using the Archi's Victima method, he has pushed all his senses to their limit: sight, hearing, judgment, and even taste, from which he can sense chemical traces in the air, and his tongue allows him to gather tons of information. He swings his sword all around the tunnel, and moves with too much high speed moving towards the tunnel. The soldiers are shocked to look at his method. Luca thinks that he can feel his arteries expanding as his heart beats louder. The rushing blood delivers glucose to his brain relentlessly, and the pressure on his brain pushes him to his limit. He is sick of everything. It's frustrating how slow his men are, and he feels like punching Kodrak in the face. He knew about it in theory, but now he can feel it himself. Prolonged use of Archi's Victima gradually damages the brain. Luca arrived at the next door entrance while his men catch up to him, then blasted the door open, knocking out one of the guys standing there. Surprised, they stood. As the Angel of Death barged through the door, they stood their ground, pointing their guns at him and started shooting. But Luca heightened his senses and began blocking the bullets with his sword at an incredible speed, then charged out, dodging the bullets fired at him. Swoosh, he chopped off the head of the first guy and kicked it towards one of the shooter, disrupting his momentum. Before he knew it, Luca chopped off his head. The other guy angrily shot a cannon weapon at Luca, but before it could get to Luca, he sliced it in half, the explosion intense displaying the wings of an angel, more like an angel of death, shattering the guy's hope. Luca charged through the smoke, and before the guy could react, he was dead. Kodrak and others arrive, shocked as they saw the crazy scene in front of them. Luca told Kodrak to stop waiting. He'd be moving forward, so he should make sure to keep up. The soldiers furiously shot at Luca and his men, raining bullets at them, but they hid behind a platform, evading the bullets. Luca never expected there would be such a spacious area underground. He deduced they must have been forming their defensive lines here, and since he was quite deep in already, he told himself there should be no problem catching up to the evacuating nobles. Luca then sent out a drone to scout the area. The drone moved stealthily, then started scanning the area. Through the drone's camera, Luca could see that their line of defense consisted of about 100 troops. Behind them, he could see what appeared to be non-military personnel retreating, thinking Lillian might be among them. One of the soldiers told Luca that their squad was moving forward too quickly compared to the other squads, suggesting they should wait for others to join them. Luca knew it was a logical suggestion since his brain was overloaded from using the Archi's combat method. Suddenly, he heard a gunshot sound, and from its sound, he realized it wasn't fired toward them. Seeing a commotion in the rear, Luca deduced that a squad had arrived here around the same time as them, and the only person besides him who would hurry that much was Ile. Luca then told them the enemy was distracted, so they should charge in. They obeyed, moving forward in a group, blocking the bullets fired at them with their shields, with Luca at the center. The bullets didn't stop, damaging their shields. One of the soldiers then told Luca that their shields wouldn't last more than a few seconds, but Luca told them they should still hold on. As Luca stood protected, though he wasn't scared, he needed to be careful of a weapon that could kill him in one shot. Since the enemies had about 8 firepower weapons, he decided to aim for the moment when more than half of them were reloading. As soon as they began reloading, Luca took the opportunity and charged out while telling his men to spread out and take cover when the enemy's attacks were focused on him. He then went directly to the enemy's front line, making his men worried about him. Not that he cared, though. Luca took the bullets head-on since he could disregard the handguns and rifles. Such light attacks couldn't penetrate his limbs. He then brought out his gun to take out the weapons that posed a threat to him. He fired the gun, taking down all the bullets that posed a threat to him in one go, then arrived at their center since they wouldn't be able to fire freely if he got between them. Surprised, the enemies couldn't react in time. Luca then split the legs of the first two soldiers in front of him with his sword. Now that he was in their center, Luca was literally unstoppable. They aggressively shot their guns at him, but after a while, the last soldier ended up surrendering. The same went for the other soldiers. The surrendered soldiers knelt. Luca then told Kodrak to restrain the rebels. He replied, "Yes, sir, platoon leader." Luca's expression immediately changed as he saw the dead soldiers on the ground. Luca realized they were men from Ilay's platoon, and with how they died, it seemed like they were tasked with attacking from the rear, which made Luca realize that Ilay was moving forward, sacrificing his men without time to regroup. Luca never expected Ilay to be so desperate to the extent that he was willing to throw away the lives of his own men. Luca gritted his teeth, angry at Ilay's actions, but he was angrier at the damn Lillian Ramenes, since Ilay was doing it because of her. Though Luca wanted to help Ilay, he was still a soldier of the Empire, so choosing one meant giving up the other. The situation really infuriated him, which made him so determined to kill Lillian on the spot if he met her. He didn't mind Ilay hating him if he could have Ilay's life spared by preventing him from becoming a traitor, but he decided to follow Ilay for now. He instructed Kodrak to continue arresting more of the rebels, until another platoon leader arrived. Once they all regrouped, he would leave the decisions to him. But as Luca was about to leave, Kodrak told him that he was an excellent soldier. His combat today wasn't just incredible, it was shocking. But Luca told him he didn't need empty praises. Kodrak added that although Luca was good, he had a major fault as a commander. Luca asked him what the issue was since they had made plenty of contributions, and if he weren't their commander, they would have suffered greater losses than they currently had. Kodrak politely told Luca his fault was that he never once led his men. He broke through the obstacles solely with his own capabilities, and relying on such methods doesn't make him a good commander. Hearing this, Luca furiously told Kodrak he only did so because of their inferior capabilities, since they would never be able to understand his proper command or fighting methods. He could scoff at the sight of them, the useless lot, whining that he didn't make use of them. But Kodrak politely told him that a day would come when he'd need the help of those weaker than him since he could not remain the strongest forever. Luca turned around, then told Kodrak he may feel free to jeer when that happens, like saying, "You see, I was right." However, he told Kodrak he would keep his advice in mind. If he came to see that his current method was wrong, he would surely recall his words when he reevaluated his strategy. Kodrak said to himself that he never knew such an ego could coexist with an openness to flexible thinking. He then wished Luca the best. Luca charged out at an incredible speed. On his way, he could see scorched walls and empty shells, corpses of nobles who picked up weapons unfamiliar to their soft hands in order to buy time, certain that similar things must be happening in the corridors beside him. Also, most of the suppression forces had entered and were wiping out the rebels. Luca had no choice but to admit that Ilay wasn't just someone he trusted in battle. He was a friend. Though it was a bit corny to say it aloud, it was the truth. He was the first person his age with whom he could exchange deep thoughts on equal standing. He saw another dead soldier, not just one. He was angry at the fact that Ilay was expending soldiers of the Empire for his own personal motives. The soldiers wouldn't have had to die. An ordinary platoon would never have risked their men to chase the rebels. Even if Ilay were to get in contact with Lillian, there was no way he would get her out, and she would die in the end, he thought. Though Luca understood she was a woman he loved, Ilay didn't need to die together with her, and he had been overtaken by a rush of emotions. Luca then heard a voice speaking, saying he surrendered and was of the Ramenes family. But Luca told him he didn't care whether he surrendered or not. He then asked if he knew where Lillian Ramenes went. The man stuttered and replied he didn't know which way she went. Luca immediately noticed the man's iris shift to the right, a common reaction when someone's lying. Luca then grabbed the man's head. The man worriedly shouted out, asking Luca what the hell he was trying to do after he had surrendered. He screamed in pain as Luca pressed his head. Luca gave him a final chance and asked again which way Ramenes had run off to. The man immediately replied that she went down. Luca never expected her to go down since you'd need to ascend in the end if you wanted to get out. He asked the man if there was another escape route that led up. The man told him he didn't know since they didn't tell indirect family members like him the details. Luca then asked him again as he pressed his eyes if he had seen Ilay Karthika. The man replied yes, saying Ilay was the one who put him in such a state. A crazy bastard. They knew each other, but Ilay still put him in such a state even after he had surrendered. Unwilling to hear him yap any longer, Luca exploded the man's face. The man would have been executed anyway, so he'd be better off dying like this than undergoing torture. Luca said to himself that he didn't typically feel guilty about killing people, but today he was feeling particularly numb. Such is what battle turns a man into. Down the hallway, Luca could hear the screams and gunshots drawing nearer. He then wondered what he should do if Ilay crossed the road of no return. Luca had always felt paranoid when he hung out with Ilay, so much so that he kept asking himself the question, what would he do if Ilay turned against the Empire? He kept putting off answering it, but he couldn't anymore, and now he had to confront it. As he came through the hallway, he saw the bodies of multiple dead soldiers, and in front of him was Ilay. Ilay put on his helmet, and with a sad tone he remarked, "So you came, Luca." "Ilay has finally done it," Luca commented. He had led his men to their deaths for his own selfish purpose. Standing in front of Luca wasn't just Ilay, but Vigo Ramenes, head of the Ramenes family, and his direct family members. Lillian was also there. Seeing her, Luca got really angry because she was the cause of everything. Ilay placed his hand on his sword, then brought it out together with his gun. He knew Luca wouldn't overlook the incident, so he told him to draw his sword. Luca drew out his sword and told Ilay he was going to beat some sense into him. For a moment there was silence in the room as both stood still. The thought of fighting Ilay came to Luca's mind. Theoretically, he would win if he didn't make any major mistakes, but real combat is full of variables. What's more, he couldn't take Ilay down quickly, and Ilay would hold him off. giving the Ramanes family enough time to escape. So Luca decided to kill them first. Luca didn't care if killing Lillian would make Ile hate him with every fiber of his being, since at least that way he wouldn't have Ile's blood on his hands. But while he was deep in thought, Ile told Luca that it seemed like he was planning to go for Lillian. Ile then shot at Luca, as Luca charged forward toward the Ramanes family. Ile immediately went after him, shooting at Luca. Luca knew a single firearm was useless against them since their trajectory prediction made the user shoot with the aim of slowing their opponent down. However, before embarking on today's mission, Luca had forcibly expanded the speed and frequency ranges of his cybernetic signals, so there was no way Ile could stop him with such sloppy shooting. Luca arrived at the door. In front were 2 guards ready to take him down. Ile worriedly told them to get away from Luca, then shot a bullet at him. But before the bullet could hit, Luca swiftly took down the first guy, splitting his body in half. He then immediately turned around to confront the bullet, blocking it with his sword and parrying it to the other guard's side, taking him down. Momentum high, he charged forward at the parents, stabbing the father with his sword through his beard to his skull, and immediately split the mother in half. Now, only Lillian Ramanes was left. Luca knew he had plenty of time to kill her, even though Ile would restrain him soon. Lillian Ramanes, the woman who had approached Luca with affection. Luca knew he wouldn't be able to forget about her until he purged the guilt of killing her from his soul, so he decided to make her death painless, which was the best he could offer her. But at that split moment, he was surprised to see her laughing as tears dripped down her face. During that moment of hesitation, Ile vigorously charged at Luca, pushing him away from Lillian. Lillian, breathing heavily, watched as the 2 best friends fought against each other. Pinned down, Luca asked Ile if he saw her face earlier. She thinks it's hilarious that her family died, Luca said. Speechless for a moment, Ile told Luca it wasn't surprising since she had finally been freed from her family, one that treated her as nothing more than a tool for arranged marriages. Luca, confused, had no idea what the hell Ile was talking about. Then he slammed Ile's stomach with his knee, leaving Ile groaning in pain. He told Ile to stop being so defensive, since that woman was nothing but another traitor in the end. As Lillian came to help Ile up, Ile told Luca that he knew nothing. The families marked as traitors had never rebelled against the Empire. It was just an excuse for the Empire to wipe them out. He said Luca should see how flimsy their defenses were for people who were supposedly attempting treason. If they had truly wanted to rise against the Empire, they would have involved Cora or Bellotto instead of their own troops. Luca, speechless, knew what Ile said was right. Getting into the arcane fortress had been difficult, but everything after that went smoothly. Considering that 3 noble families had plotted treason together, their forces were too small. If they were really planning a rebellion, there was no reason they wouldn't have sought assistance from Cora or Bellotto, both of whom desired divisions within the Empire. But Luca didn't care about that because even if what Ile said was true, it didn't change anything. At this rate, Ile was going to end up dying together with Lillian Ramanes. Lillian, speechless for a moment, looked at Luca. As she stood up, she told him that her father was not innocent. He had hidden the fact that they had discovered an arcane relic. Ile worriedly told her to stop since now wasn't the time to talk about that, but she continued. She told Luca that the reason the Empire came after her family was because of the arcane relic. It was thanks to it that they were able to operate the ancient fortress they were currently in. Luca asked why she was telling him this now. She replied, saying it wasn't like Luca didn't kill her out of guilt. He was scared of Ile hating him for it. Her word really surprised Luca. She told Luca that he must be aware that Ile, his friend, couldn't live the life he wanted in the Empire. But there was a choice that benefited the 3 of them. She approached Luca with the relic, telling him that with it, they could activate the teleportation device located in the underground fortress. She told Luca to help them break free from the Empire's control, leaving Luca completely speechless. Luca couldn't believe his ears about there being a teleportation device. Lillian told him that it exists since they set one up in the tunnels. It's probably an escape route in case the fortress falls. She then told Luca to feel free to kill her if it's not the truth since she doesn't want to see Ile die protecting her either. But if they can activate the teleportation device with the arcane relic, then she and Ile can finally escape the Empire. And all Luca will need to do is report that he didn't see them. Luca questioned her, asking if she really thought the Empire would have left a device like that around. She replied, telling him that only the direct lineage of the Ramanes family knows about the route. They'll be safe if they go deep underground. Luca, speechless, thought to himself that he's tempted. He doesn't care whether Lillian dies or not. However, he needs to think about the best choice for Ile's sake. Ile has always wanted to leave the Empire, and Luca is sure his dangerous ideas will inevitably get him executed someday. However, this is the battlefield where it's easy to claim he died or went missing. After a moment of thinking, Luca withdrew his sword. Seeing this, Ile became happy, but Luca told him to shut up as he was about to talk. Luca then told Ile to promise him that if the teleportation device Lillian mentioned doesn't exist or doesn't work, then he shouldn't stand in his way of beheading her. Even she wouldn't want him getting into trouble. Ile immediately went silent, looked at Lillian speechless, but seeing the determined expression on her face, Ile thought for a moment, clenched his teeth, and promised Luca. And so, they charged out for the teleportation device. They moved stealthily and fast. On their way, Luca said to himself that he had really lost it in the brain. Not only is he not stopping Ile, but he's also guarding Lillian Ramones. They'll be done for if the other soldiers catch sight of his actions. Lillian then told Luca to hold on. She told Ile she should clean the blood on his face before it dries. Seeing their romantic moment, Luca sighed and suggested they should get married if they're both lucky enough to make it out alive. Ile then pushed her hand away, prompting Lillian to guiltily apologize, saying she didn't think things would end up like this. Ile told her not to worry about it since she's the one who taught him about the outside world. She didn't expect Ile to be helping her just for a small reason like that, but Ile told her it's not small to him. It changed the way he saw the world. Thanks to her, he was finally able to find the source of his frustration. If it weren't for her, he would have gone crazy a long time ago. It made him realize that he's not weird, just different. Luca said to himself that Lillian is a woman who helped foster Ilay's dissenting ideals. Such thoughts spread like a disease between people, and will eat the empire up from within. The empire will definitely crumble if such dangerous thoughts are allowed to spread. Maybe Balado or Korra will strike before they meet their own demise. He doesn't wish for the empire's downfall. If needed, he's ready to kill potential dangers with his own hands, even if it's Ilay, since he's not a dissident. As they opened the door, Luca took a deep breath and told them they could catch a break now. Lillian relaxed, then told Luca she's the only one alive who knows the route, so the pursuers won't be able to find them easily, because it's like a maze. She added that her father didn't report anything despite receiving permission to study the ruins. He had ambitions far beyond his capacities when he figured out how to activate the fortress, but it was all in the Empire's hands. More importantly, Luca asked her how much farther they needed to go. She pointed forward, saying they'll come up soon on this corridor. She then thanked Luca for saving her and Ilay. Luca told her he's just repaying a debt to Ilay. The next time they meet, she'll definitely be dead. He then told Ilay to stay safe. Lillian told Ilay that if they manage to survive, she's going to the border city, so they should meet if they manage to split up. She then told Luca that if he wants to leave, but Luca immediately interrupted, telling her he isn't interested. He then placed his hand on the door to open it. Luca said to himself that he's really exhausted. Deciding to help Ilay might have been a mistake he made in the heat of the moment, but he can't rest now. He needs to think of how he'll report the incident once things are over. The good news is that the chief centurion holds him in good light, so only he can continue to spy on Kinuen. Ilay and Lillian are just a trainee and a noble, so they aren't special, and he won't ask many questions. He then told Ilay to prepare himself, because he would have to kill Lillian if the device isn't there. He then pressed the door button, but at that moment, Luca had a bad feeling, and he decided to figure out the source of his distress right now. What he knows for sure is that the cause lies beyond the door. It's not strange that it's bright inside since the fort's activation turned on all the lights. So he decided to block his other senses and focus solely on the scent. Doing that, the first thing he smelled was blood. After that, the scent of oil and iron followed. He gritted his teeth as he realized he didn't smell any signs of humans. And as soon as the door opened fully, in front of him were many Imperial guards. At that moment, Luca knew they were doomed. The worst-case scenario would be if they chose to capture Lillian alive. Luca knew she wasn't trained like him, so she'd break under torture and reveal everything. If that happens, the higher-ups will learn of their rebellious actions. Luca thought he could get them out and help Ilay live the life he wanted, but he realized it was just a sweet fantasy. Now, he calculated that there's only one way out. They need to immediately kill Lillian with their own hands. The Imperial guards might have their suspicions, but they could make an excuse that the higher-ups would understand. But the problem is Ilay. Will he be able to keep his calm after witnessing Lillian's death? And they'll be totally doomed if he attacks the Imperial guard. The Imperial guard turned around, seeing that their eyes met. Luca knew time was slipping away because the longer he hesitated, the more suspicions would grow. So it's now or never. But before Luca could turn around, a bullet was shot into Lillian's head, surprising Luca and even the Imperial guards. The person who shot it was none other than Ilay himself. She died without even knowing who killed her. The guard then asked Luca and Ilay for the reason why they shot the gun. Ilay replied that he executed a hostage they no longer had use for. The guard questioned again, asking why he brought a rebel all the way here. He then told Ilay to report everything that's happened so far, and he'd decide what to do after that. Ilay replied, "Understood." Luca stood shocked, even as the Imperial guards left the scene, unable to say a word as Lillian's corpse laid waste on the ground. Hours later, Luca was summoned by the commander. The commander told Luca, the 21st platoon leader, that he did excellent work. Luca thanked him for the compliment. The commander then remarked that Kodrak rated him quite highly. He specifically praised Luca's combat skills, saying they were the best he had ever worked with as his platoon leader. But he stated that Luca's ability to form trust with his subordinates was lacking, though the commander doesn't care since Luca would improve on that while learning from Kinuen. Anyways, he added, the report mentions that Luca waited until Lillian Ramones led him to the deepest part of the tunnels and then executed her. He then asked Luca if there's a reason he chose her specifically as his guide. Luca has been waiting for the question. He replied yes, Ilay and him planned to stop the escape of the rebels by taking over the teleportation device, for which they believed Lillian Ramones was the best choice to take as their hostage, given that she was weak in combat. His explanation does sound logical, but the commander still had one question to ask Luca. Luca commented, "Is it about my relationship with Lillian?" The commander replied, "Not just Luca, even Ilay has strong connections to Lillian Ramones." Luca, though speechless for a moment, told the commander that neither he nor Ilay is foolish enough to ruin the mission over something like mere feelings. Him, as the chief centurion, would know better than anyone. And to be honest, he wanted to offer Lillian some hope that she'd be able to survive if she assisted them. They believed it was the least they could do for her. The commander sternly looked Luca in the eye. At that moment, a shiver ran through Luca's spine. He thought his explanation isn't enough, so he prayed dearly for the commander to believe him. A few seconds later, the commander broke the silence with a laugh, then told Luca they should leave it at that since he must be tired. And as Luca was about to leave, the commander stopped him. With a grin, he told Luca that with how the Ramones family efficiently wiped out Ilay's platoon, he had no choice but to admit it was surprising that they possessed such exceptional abilities. The commander's words held heavy weight on Luca. Though scared, Luca decided the commander's words aren't something to be surprised about, since he mentioned all that happened in the report. Ilay's platoon was eliminated by an ambush while pursuing the rebels, but he had no idea the commander's intentions in trying to test him like this. He felt like he could break into a cold sweat at any moment. He replied, saying had it been him in the first place, he would have prevented his platoon from getting eliminated. So he believes the top seat of their corps will be his. The captain grinned as he took his tea, saying he's expecting great things from Luca. Another scene, inside a train. Luca sat. As he was on his way to the capital, he fell asleep, like a log, which is expected since he had spent days without any time to relax. The damned things he has experienced rushed through his mind. Ilay, Lillian, the arcane fortress, the relic, the teleportation device, and the border city, the place where Lillian wanted to go. In the end, she died before she could even make it out of the Empire, at the hands of Ilay at that, the very person she must have considered her knight in shining armor. At that time, Luca couldn't bear to look at Ilay's face, since Ilay only killed Lillian because he was there. Otherwise, he would have willingly met his end along with her. Luca felt sorry for them, but he achieved his goal, which was to save Ilay, and that's fine. Hours later, after returning to the capital, Akbaran, they rested. They were then awarded medals of honor based on their achievements. They were awarded the 7th rank cross medal. Out of all the Imperial Guard cadets, only Ilay and Luca have received such prestigious medals. Now, at the top of a building, Ilay and Luca stood having a conversation. Ilay remarked that it was ironic he was rewarded with a medal of honor. Luca told Ilay he never expected him to kill Lillian. He thought he'd try to attack the Imperial Guard, knowing he had no chance. Ilay agreed. He definitely would have if Luca hadn't been there. He added, his family is quite happy that he earned a medal, even though they used to interact with the Ramanesses quite often. Luca, speechless for a moment, then told Ilay he should quit. Being a soldier isn't for him. Luca said so because Ilay literally killed his own men to serve his personal attachments. The soldiers died for something as trivial as one man's love. Ilay told him he'd quit if he could. But it won't be easy since his family wants to make him an Imperial Guard no matter what it takes. Ilay added, it would have been better to kill him. Angered, Luca punched the shit out of his stomach, causing the medal to fall and break from Ilay's hand. As Ilay groaned, Luca told him to watch his mouth. Ilay remarked, ugh, it hurts quite a bit. He thinks his organs might be damaged. Luca told him to quit whining. Even if his organs break, he can get them replaced with something mechanical. Ilay stood up, saying he has never been angrier at himself. If only he had given his all to become stronger. Luca interrupted, told him nothing would have changed even if he did. Ilay became emotional, as he recalled the shit he has done. Luca remained silent, knowing that Ilay is not a cold-blooded murderer. He feels the guilt of killing his subordinates. Even though he did all that, he still couldn't save Lillian, and there's no doubt he'll die soon. Whether it be his mind or his life, he really doesn't belong in the Empire. Some unknown time later, in another scene after the emotional moments, Ilay told Luca he's going to take a leave and head home for a bit. It's been 4 years, so they should be allowed a couple of months. Luca decided to ask Ilay one last thing. He asked why did Lillian laugh as she watched her family die. Ilay replied, saying she had a fiancé arranged by her family. He was a man 30 years older than her. He continued, when Lillian was born, he promised an immense sum of money in exchange for one condition. He requested that she be raised to be exactly like his deceased wife, even sending heaps of pictures and records to ensure it. Lillian's face, preferences, habits, and even her name. None of it was by her own choice, which must have been excruciating. That was why she was so knowledgeable about Balado as well. Luca found it revolting, realizing this is what happens when twisted desires meet power. All Ilay said meant she was abused from birth, and Claude was the only one who offered her any sympathy. Luca thought Claude set him up with Lillian because of that, but Ilay burst out a hearty laugh, then told Luca that it was him and Lillian who set that up. When Ilay told Claude that Luca is the chief centurion's secret bastard child, Claude took the bait. Luca, surprised, called Ilay a motherfucker. What's more, he didn't believe Claude could believe such a thing. Ilay added, of course he would. Because everyone knew how dearly the chief centurion treated Luca. It would explain how someone from a double-digit orphanage managed to become an Imperial Guard trainee. And since the captain is from the Custoria family, Claude thought that if Lillian conceived his child, it would set her free. As Ilay apologized, Luca said to himself that though Ilay is his friend, he's not a good man. If needed, he'll deceive others. He went ahead to kill his own subordinates, then lied to Luca. But as ironic as it is, Luca still trusts him with his back. Luca never thought he'd feel such a way despite what Ilay has done. He then decided to hit Ilay one more time. Another scene. Kinuan closed his book, remarked that their war hero is finally here. Luca periodically visited Kinuan, someone who he needed to monitor, though Kinuan is well aware that he's following the chief centurion's orders, though he can't say he hated the time he spent with Kinuan. Kinuan asked Luca if he received the Cross Sword Medal. Luca told Kinuan it's just a 7th rank medal. Everyone gets their hands on it eventually. Compared to Kinuan's extravagant achievements, it's nothing. Luca sat down, told Kinuan he heard from the chief centurion that he knows how to manage subordinates well. Kinuan laughed, questioned if Halas said that. Well, since he saw Luca's combat records, he decided to give him a few pointers, then asked Luca if the men were not listening to his orders. Luca replied no. They're all excellent soldiers of the Empire, willing to rush into death even at the orders of a commander they had never met. Kinuan smiled, grinned as he thought, then told Luca it must mean he was soft. Instead of utilizing his men, he chose to bear the risks himself. Luca countered, saying him doing so, their full capabilities remained intact. But Kinuan told Luca he's wrong because the more he fights up front, the heavier the burden on his brain becomes, clouding his most essential skill as a commander, which is decision-making. He expended a resource he should have conserved, all to protect his men. Luca stood up flustered, asked Kinuan if he's saying he should have used them instead. Kinuan told him he's not saying he should order them to their deaths, he needs to make men choose it willingly. He pressed a button, which showed a hologram, then asked Luca if he remembered Gilda and Gabriel from the lower floors. He saved one from the gangs and covered the other's medical expenses, so those two would be more than happy to help him. Luca thought it's because he had done something for them. But Kinyuan told Luca, it's far more than enough for them to be willing to throw their lives away for him. He needs to spend more time working for a deeper bond with them. Of course, he must also distance himself emotionally, because if he lets himself get too connected, he'll hesitate to expend them. But it's not something Luca would rather do, which is why Kinyuan likes Luca. Kinyuan continued, told Luca that the point is to be loved, but do not love them back. And that's the secret of maintaining the advantage in every human relationship. Luca then asked, what if his mind can't handle sacrificing others because of things like guilt or conscience? Kinyuan told him he better get used to it. If not, he'll never be able to stand on top of others. Luca stood up, then left the room, told Kinyuan he'll try to be more proactive in sacrificing his men next time. The next day, Luca stood with his bag at the chopper area. He was instructed by the commander to head to Krathia Academy. Luca never expected it. The commander told him it would be 2 months at most, certain it would be a good experience for Luca. Luca told the commander that he thought he would be exempt, but the commander told him it's tradition to send their best first. Ile refused, saying he wanted more time off at home. And since Luca had never experienced what the society of nobles is like, he told Luca to go if he truly wants to become part of the Custoria family. Hearing that, Luca agreed. The commander then decided to assign Luca a guide. Told Luca he has a feeling he'll like them as well. Now Luca stood, waiting for the guide. The guide finally arrived in a flying car, don't really know. The person who came to pick him up was a sexy female, hopefully she's busty, then told Luca to stop standing and come on in. Luca entered the car with his bag, while the girl sat down with her legs crossed. He sat down, then introduced himself to her as a cadet of the Royal Guard, but she told him he didn't have to say it, she already knew. Luca looked at her, speechless, realizing she had an aggressive and arrogant attitude and a body that was clearly not of a commoner. She was a noble, the same age as him. Luca told her he was there under the order of the chief, then asked her how long it would take to reach the Krathia Academy, and if she was really the guide sent by the chief. The girl sighed and asked Luca what difference it made if she knew about him. Luca clenched his fist with a slight grin and said to himself that she was a young lady he'd like to break down. Her behavior was why he disliked nobles. He then told her, no problem, young lady of the Custoria family. The girl, surprised, reluctantly asked Luca how he knew her identity. Luca told her it was a simple deduction since there weren't many people who could express dissatisfaction with the orders of Hellas Custoria, the chief. Speechless, she realized Luca didn't know her identity, but had guessed it right. Luca told her to ask her father if she was curious. He thought to himself that the woman was probably the daughter of the chief. Sending his daughter must be the chief's way of showing he intended to keep his word about adopting him. Even the girl didn't know why her father sent her as a guide. Luca thought that if he were adopted, he would be named Luca Custoria, and he smiled since it had a pretty decent resonance. Just as Luca said, the girl admitted she had come under her father's orders. With her sharp stare and commanding tone, she told him her name was Giselle Custoria, but he shouldn't act as if he was standing above her ever again since it was unpleasant. With Giselle's character, Luca realized Lillian was the better noble compared to her. He then apologized if he had offended her, but internally questioned why he had to grovel. He hadn't gone through all this trouble just to suck up to some noble. In fact, he had accepted the academy dispatch because he hated that kind of life so much. If he endured this much, the chief would understand. He sighed, then told Giselle to forget it. He'd rather bite his tongue off and die than flatter someone who hated him. So, he told her they should just do what they were ordered to do. She would guide him, and he would follow. Then he asked if that was okay now. Hearing this, Giselle couldn't hold in her disgust, but she calmed down and ignored Luca. Luca did the same, knowing he could already see the rough road ahead. Their car finally arrived. They got out and walked up the stairs. She told him to follow her. She'd guide him to the dormitory where he would be staying. As they climbed, Luca saw the statue of the Emperor of the Empire, the father of the nation, the guardian of humanity, Dinocia. He looked at the statue as he stood in front of the academy he had only seen in videos. As they entered, people looked at them. Giselle told Luca the identification color for academy students was low saturation purple. Among the crowd, a guy immediately knocked down a lower class boy, telling him to move aside. Luca saw this and was disgusted. They were doing such trashy things despite wearing good quality augmented bodies. Out of the blue, Giselle asked him what he was doing, and questioned if Luca didn't even have color-changing functions. He replied no because cadets didn't need them. She remarked, what am I supposed to do if you're not prepared for this? She lamented that her father didn't even give her a heads up. It was always her. Luca smirked, unable to believe that she'd be so flustered just by the color of her clothes. She was completely different from his first impression of her. He told her he understood and was sorry. While they were talking, a guy saw them and immediately called out Luca's name, waving at him. Luca recognized the guy as Felix. He welcomed Luca, saying he thought Luca wouldn't show up since Ile wasn't coming. He greeted Giselle, saying they had met before, introduced himself as a cadet of the Royal Guard in the same class as Luca, and asked politely if he could speak with Luca for a moment. She agreed, and told Luca to let her know when he was done. Luca felt relieved, as he could finally breathe. Felix whispered to Luca, commenting that since Miss Custoria was sticking with him, the rumors about the captain of the guard giving him special treatment must be true. Luca smiled and told him she was quite a handful. It was hard to believe she was the captain's daughter. She had disrespected him from the moment they met. If they were outside, he would have broken her nose already. Felix told Luca the captain probably wanted him to experience noble society a little for his future. Maybe he'd even take him in as a son-in-law. Luca told him it was ridiculous. But Felix insisted, saying that in the end, the people Luca would associate with in the future were nobles. Luca thought, son-in-law? No way. He didn't have the best personality, and if his spouse was just as bad, it would be a disaster. More importantly, he had already made a promise with the captain of the guard, a secret pact to monitor Kinuan in exchange for being adopted into the Custoria family. So, he wouldn't be a son-in-law, but an adopted son. Felix then asked Luca if he had gotten augmented. Luca replied no, not yet. Felix gave him a paper, telling him to take good care of himself. Luca was surprised as he looked at the paper. Felix waved, telling Luca that cadets on dispatch were traditionally popular with the ladies. Luca pocketed the paper, which contained information that would be useful for his academy life. It looked like he'd get along well with Felix after the dispatch was over. Meanwhile, Giselle was murmuring, wondering how long Luca would stand there. One piece of information Felix told Luca about was the dormitory. To summarize, the dormitory was a place where lower-class individuals like Luca, who had been recognized for their talent, and the children of fallen families had no choice but to stay. They couldn't afford separate residences due to their financial status. As Luca left with Giselle, he wondered if there was still a hierarchy even within these walls. Then again, it wouldn't be fun if it were that easy, so he decided to look around later. He was surprised when he was brought to the room assigned to him. The robot told Luca to contact him if he needed anything else. Luca replied no. The room was fine. It was practically a palace. He touched the chair, questioning if this was really where fallen nobles and lower-class people lived. The best really are different, he remarked. Though it was because the academy was where people with exceptional talents gathered, even if they weren't suitable to be soldiers. He sat down, closed his eyes, and recalled Giselle telling him that the dormitory was where he'd be staying. The dorm manager would come to guide him once class was over. She gave Luca her device's unique number and told him to contact her if anything happened. Luca asked, "Don't you hate me?" She replied that she had no intention of ignoring the mission her father gave her. Hearing this, Luca understood she was saying she would take responsibility for what she was assigned to. She wasn't just a spoiled brat after all. As she was about to leave, he told her she probably wouldn't have to call him anymore after this. "I hope so too," she replied. She paused and told Luca she'd be giving him advice for the first time out of goodwill. He should stay away from the dorm manager because she was the biggest psycho in Kracia Academy. Luca glanced at the door. The girl called him at his apartment. The protagonist appeared before her, sheepishly introduced herself as Barbara, the dorm leader. Holding his head, MC stated his name and said he was an Imperial Guard trainee. His eyes began to glow. Looking at Barbara, MC began to speculate that her frayed cuffs, old clothes, and the fact that she introduced herself without a last name meant she was a commoner. He imagined Giselle and noted that she didn't seem particularly crazy. Perhaps she simply hated people from the lower sector. Standing before him, Barbara declared that he must admit he was amazing, having managed to become an Imperial Guard trainee despite being from the lower sector. She laughed when Luca replied that the same could be said for her. Becoming the dorm leader was no small achievement. Smiling, the protagonist guessed she must have moved mountains to reach her current position, just like him. Smiling, the girl asked him to follow her as she would show him how things worked. It was her duty as the dorm's leader. The puzzled boy watched her. MC noticed the drops of water dripping from her hair and assumed she'd just gotten out of the shower. Even though she'd said she'd just come from class, she clearly hadn't had time to wash herself. He watched her go and concluded that perhaps she simply knew how to manage it well. We were transported to the main building of the academy. Luca stood before Giselle. She regarded her companion thoughtfully. The puzzle protagonist listened as she explained that he was now dressed appropriately as she told him, and that they could go to class. Her father had ordered her to attend classes with him for a week. The protagonist followed her. He turned when he heard a voice calling Giselle. Barbara lowered her head and asked how long it had been since they'd spoken. Turning around, the girl asked her to get lost in the fog. The embarrassed dorm leader replied she just wanted to say hello. Giselle started walking toward her. She approached her. The furious girl greeted her and asked if she would leave now as she had nothing else to talk about. Turning around, she asked the guy to hurry up as he shouldn't be late for class. Luca turned around. Looking at Barbara, he silently wondered if she'd really been entrusted with running the dorm with that attitude given her stiff posture like all members of the lower quadrant. Closing his eyes, the protagonist decided he didn't like it. They walked down the hallway. Looking at the girl's back, MC suggested they knew each other well, to which he replied that Barbara only imagined it that way. They'd simply enrolled at the academy at the same time. He thought with a serious expression that the girl was ignoring him. Pausing, the boy reflected on Giselle calling Barbara the craziest girl in Croatia Academy. Yet, Barbara still wanted to get closer to her. Closing his eyes, he reflected that he was curious, but it was none of his business. The main thing was to last 2 months there and then he'd be officially recognized as an aristocrat. There was no point in worrying about trivialities. He sat on the bench and told us that he thought so, but after attending these boring classes for a whole week, he decided that getting involved in their relationship would be more interesting. The knife spun quickly in the air. Imagining girls, the main character remarked that there was nothing to do in this dreary place intended for prim nobility. He tossed the knife. Imagining Felix, Luca added that even his friend had refused to fight him, citing the fact that he'd be too embarrassed to lose. At this rate, he'd quickly become rusty. Raising his head, MC mentally noted that he wanted to fight. Thoughts of carnage plagued his mind. After all, he was a living weapon. Perhaps as a trainee, he'd been injected with something to increase his aggression. He imagined a biohazard symbol and added that his fists were itching furiously. Catching the knife, the guy heard someone call him. The protagonist's gaze shifted. The stranger, looking displeased, inquired about his relationship with Giselle since he'd been following her around for a week. Luca then asked why he had to answer that question. The guy was embarrassed. He lashed out at the protagonist who asked what he saw in that stupid girl. MC glanced at him. He pushed the opponent's fist away. He grabbed his arm. Closing his eyes, the guy thought he couldn't believe he'd taken out his anger on such a weakling. Wiping away tears, the stranger asked if there was anything going on between him and Giselle. Sitting next to him, Luca asked him to ask one more question, and the battered stranger asked why he should answer. The irritated protagonist declared he'd tell Giselle he was a great great guy, then asked why she hated Barbara so much. Looking away, the curly-haired boy explained that it wasn't always like this, that which had simply cursed her. He imagined the dorm leader who controlled the robots, and explained that anyone who got close to her would end up in unpleasant incidents with deranged androids. These androids' artificial intelligence that shouldn't malfunction simply went crazy, a phenomenon they even called Barbara's curse. Extending his hand, Luca explained that even if such incidents happened to her more often, he didn't think it was because of Barbara. She responded that it was creepy, after which, the stranger wondered if someone so aware of the danger she posed to others would be so desperate to make friends. Clenching his fist, the protagonist listened as she explained that this was why many avoided her, and why she was the dorm leader, a position with no perks but a ton of responsibilities. The boy pointed his finger at Barbara. The students poured water on her. Barbara stood still. The student, looking pleased, apologized as her hand had trembled. The girl was surprised by the request to undress right there so she could wash her clothes, but replied that she was fine and would simply change in her room. The stranger declared that Barbara was stupid enough to refuse her kindness. With a threatening expression, she ordered him to undress and give her his clothes. She would clean them until they were squeaky clean. The dorm leader closed her eyes. She began to remove her tie. The students watched her silently. Luca frowned. He remembered the water dripping from Barbara's hair, and noted that he now understood why her head was so wet the day they met in the dorm. She had been forced to wash herself and rush over. The protagonist, fingering the knife, thought she was lucky as he'd already reached the point where he couldn't control himself. He raised his hand to throw. The knife pierced the mug, which flew out of the delinquent's hand. MC approaching ordered her to finish it, noting that he didn't care even if she was a girl. She was horrified by the guy's words, saying he turned her face into mincemeat. The girls left. Luca watched them go. He turned his attention to Barbara. The dorm leader thanked him with an embarrassed expression. A smirk appeared on his face, and he wondered if they were close enough now to be attacked by crazy androids. He bent over trying to catch his breath. Turning around, he informed her that the girl was Kizukano, and that the protagonist had been wrong to mess with her. The main character, with a serious expression, thought he dragged him away in such a hurry. He wondered what he was about to say, then replied that he knew who it was, but her feeble family wouldn't do anything to him. The stunned stranger declared that it was only on the surface. The Kano clan ran a gang in the lower sector that made money for them through illegal trade. As they spoke, they were already looking for a way to put him down. Closing his eyes, Luca declared that he very much hoped they would succeed because this pace of life was very boring. After which, the curly-haired brunette simply asked him to be careful, as they were known for mercilessly dealing with anyone who laid a finger on Kisa. Even Barbara got into trouble for the same reason. Kisa's boyfriend had fallen under Barbara's curse. MC, with a thoughtful expression, replied that he would keep that in mind. He shifted his gaze. Giselle looked at them with a disdainful expression. The boy was confused by Luca's offer to say hello to the girl he liked. Closing his eyes, he cried out that he was glad he could admire her from afar. Luca simply needed to put in a good word for him. Gesturing at the fleeing boy, the protagonist explained that he had made friends. A sweet and kind man named Enrico Lacan. An irritated Giselle explained that he gave her the creeps. No matter how she looked at him, Enrico was always hanging around her. The upset protagonist silently apologized, as he would never achieve this goal. The boys walked down the hallway. Luca arrived at Professor Jid Albin's office, who asked if he had really thrown a dagger at the student. The man held a knife in his hand, and said that even if it was a penknife, there would be no end to the problems. He understood that it was stuffy there, but the main character should try to overcome this feeling. Afterwards, we were introduced to the dean in charge of the Imperial Guard trainee. The young man, holding his hands behind his back, replied that he understood, and then reflected that, as expected of a retired Imperial Guardsman, he hadn't pressed him. Sitting at the table, the guide declared that the local children weren't trained to fight, so Luca was like a wolf thrown into a sheep pen. He then added that they were asking for it, even though they knew a wolf would bite. Clutching his head, the dean emphasized the fact that these very sheep would eventually become the bureaucratic elite, and soldiers like them would be their errand boys. While these students seemed like innocent little sheep to him now, they were essentially monsters in sheep's clothing. Frowning, the teacher remarked that these were monsters even more terrifying than wolves. The protagonist took the knife and listened to the teacher explain that youth was wonderful, but one shouldn't get too carried away with such things, to which he replied that he would take note. He left the room looking furious. As he left the office, the boy reflected that he hadn't come there to chase away monsters but to cast the witch's curse. He walked out into the forest. Luca was moving along the path behind the training grounds. Stretching his arm, he reflected that curfew had long since passed. Everyone should know by now that he protected Barbara, and if those rumors about the curse were true, it was time for it to take effect and bring a crowd of enraged androids to him. The protagonist suddenly stopped. Someone came forward to greet him. MC noticed a man who asked if it was Luca, the trainee sent to the academy. Looking at the stranger, the protagonist emphasized the fact that so far only the Oddnat had flocked to him. Surrounded by them, he asked if the bandits had any business with him, to which he was told it was simply a greeting from Lady Klessa. Such was the Kano clan's rule, to warmly greet those who caused them trouble. The boy, looking pleased, asked if the protagonist would report his students to his superiors for beating him up. After all, he was an incredible Imperial Guard trainee. Frowning, MC wondered if this thug really thought he'd be able to hit him even once. Standing opposite, he heard him explain that he'd be given a chance, that he should go to the Mistress Neil and apologize since Kalisa had said she was willing to let him off the hook this time. He replied that in that case, he'd also give them a chance to get out of there while their limbs were intact since kids who had never seen real combat were no match for him. The enraged thug asked what the big deal was. He charged into battle. The boy appeared in front of the protagonist. He flew at Luca, asking him to dodge if he could. The protagonist's eyes began to glow. He stood motionless. A bright glow could be seen in the forest. The robot appeared before them. He looked at them and asked if they needed help. The stunned student cried out that his comrade had said there weren't any patrols planned at this time. Pointing a finger at the protagonist, he declared that the intern was free for the day. They would reschedule their greeting for another day. MC turned around. The guys around him were discussing whether they were crazy enough to start a fight in front of an android. The robot began to follow the bandit and offer help. The android stopped, saying that this couldn't be happening. It suddenly charged. Its eye glowed bright red. It decapitated one of the students. Blood spurted from his body. The student was stained with his comrade's blood. The bandit was terrified. The robot prepared to charge. It charged. The android leaped at Kisa's subordinate. He gritted his teeth in fear. Luca hit the robot in the head. The android flew to the side. It fell to the ground. The stunned young man cried out that Barbara's curse was real. It was genuine. MC smiling said that students at CRA Academy shouldn't blindly believe in curses. He began to advance toward the robot. Smoke was rising from the android. Looking down, Luca wondered if it was using all its capabilities, which is why it only lasted a couple of minutes. Examining the robot, the protagonist emphasized the fact that he should have foreseen this. To defeat it, the android had to be fully charged. Examining the enemy, he concluded that it wasn't a technical glitch. He imagined the hand controlling the puppet and added that it was human mischief. Grinning, Luca asked if it was time to warm up. Luca stood looking at the robot. The android jumped up, moving to attack the hero. The young man looked calmly in his direction. The boy dodged the enemy's blow. The cadet smiled, thinking that it had been a lethal blow, albeit reckless, and wondering if he was programmed with high-quality combat software. He looked at his hands, wondering if he even had metal claws. If he took one of those blows, he'd be in the hospital for a week. The hero effortlessly dodged the robot again and again, thinking that even though it wasn't particularly impressive, he knew he needed something more, something that could stimulate his dopamine. Luca swung his legs, striking. The robot flew off into the forest. The hero knew he needed more than just an android. He watched silently as his opponent tried to attack. The young man smiled, hoping the iron thing would live up to his expectations. The robot turned when he saw the knife flying into his back. The opponent hurried away from the area. He turned his head, beginning to move. The guy jumped on his back, telling him he was a complete disappointment. The man gritted his teeth. The cadet pinned him to the ground, attacking, and asked how he was any different from an average guy if he was distracted by everything. He was standing on the robot when it called for backup. The young man touched his face, saying he thought he was going to kill him, adding that it was time to get serious and stop warming up, arguing that it wasn't enough to quench his bloodlust. The enemy ran into the forest. Luca watched him go, telling him he was being silly. A bright light illuminated his face as he looked up. The protagonist saw 3 airships in the sky. The guy sat on a bench waiting. He clutched his chin, thinking about how, after that incident, the security forces had asked him to help with the investigation. The young man reasoned that the villain behind the androids was clearly within the academy's walls, and they needed to identify suspects. Security force investigator Jillian Campbell touched his face, noting that nobles hated being scrutinized, but they wouldn't hesitate in the face of a killer. Luca looked at the man, questioning his reference to nobles, and his certainty that the killer wasn't from the lower sector. He replied that he definitely wasn't. They would never have been able to penetrate the defenses and hack the academy's closed security system. The young man sitting across from him said he was an ordinary student and asked why they assumed he would be useful in the investigation. Jillian replied that not everyone could master our case victim. It required exceptional instincts, but he had making him ideal for the role of investigator. The cadet stared ahead, silently wondering how he'd found out. The man noticed his expression was curious and wanted to say something. The investigator pointed, explaining that ARC Victima users were important enough to be added to a separate list, and naturally special attention was paid to those still learning, like himself. The protagonist asked why. The man said he could get the answer from the one who taught him this technique. The cadet imagined the man in his mind, wondering who Kinyuan was. The protagonist looked away when someone called out to him. The enraged girl was screaming, asking what the hell he was doing, and did the guy even understand the consequences of disobeying his father's orders. She added that she'd already told that barber woman not to approach him, and she hadn't. Luca bowed his head, replying that he personally couldn't stand to watch a crowd mock one person. Giselle held out her hand, asking what he meant by continuing to get into trouble. The boy calmly replied that if they bothered her again, he'd have to. The girl bit her fingernail. She sounded angry when she said, "Fine, then she'll meet with Kizakano and try to negotiate since a compromise could be found through negotiations." The cadet tilted his head, wondering why Giselle was so eager to smooth things over. His eye lit up blue as he understood. The girl looked away, thinking about the woman and how her words about a compromise being found through negotiations meant only one thing. She was sure Kalisa would submit to her. Giselle's eyes widened when she heard the boy try to talk to her too. Luca smiled, saying he too had no desire to fall into disfavor with the boss. He gritted his teeth, thinking he wanted to check one more thing. The girl screamed, clutching her head about Barbara hitting her boyfriend first. The protagonist crossed his arms, knowing she didn't seem like the type to allow such a thing, asking if she was sure she'd set her boyfriend on Barbara on purpose. Kalisa looked at him in surprise, asking again. The cadet placed his finger on the chessboard. The board showed a young man, and when Luca asked how he could refuse when the girl threatened him with her men, reminding him that she had done the same to him, It said Kalesa said, "Hi, that's family code for declaring revenge, isn't it?" The protagonist sat on the couch, wondering if she just needed an excuse to pester Barbara. Kalesa slammed the table, telling him to shut up, shouting that she'd done nothing wrong. Giselle clutched her head, telling the girl to calm down when she protested. She glared at Kisa, telling her that enough was enough. Kalesa bowed her head, listening to her insistence that she intended to ignore Giselle's words. The boy stood by the door when the woman asked the hero for a moment to speak privately, to which he agreed. The young man put his hands in his pockets, arguing that, as he had assumed, Giselle was bossing Kalesa around. But one unresolved question remained. Why didn't Giselle simply order Kalesa to stop bullying him? The hero knew he would only be at the academy for a couple of months. He wondered if that would be easier than starting a conversation between him and Kisa, wouldn't it? The woman approached the boy from behind. Giselle clutched her head, explaining that she had hoped she wouldn't start a scene, and that he wouldn't push it. The young man shrugged, explaining that he was simply testing a theory within the investigation that only members of the nobility could have hacked the androids, and that Kisa was a likely suspect given her hatred of Barbara. The girl clarified his presumption, asking him to stop playing detective, asking that there were enough investigators assigned to the case, so why would the young man bother? The cadet looked her in the eye, expressing his confidence that the investigators were having a great time interrogating aristocrats. Giselle asked if he was teasing her, to which she replied that he simply told her as it was and thought it sounded a bit like the girls shutting Kisa up with a few words. Giselle closed her eyes, saying that family background was crucial in the aristocratic world, and Kisa was simply in no position to ignore her, and that was all. The woman's eyes widened as she listened to the question, suggesting that Kisa could therefore simply be ordered to bully Barbara. The girl clenched her fists, clarifying what he was implying. The cadet spread his hands, replying that someone who hated Barbara suddenly had a pawn at hand who could solve the problem, so she used her resources. That's what he was implying. Giselle's hair stirred. The girl grabbed him by the hem of his clothes, urging him to stop talking nonsense. She pressed her head against his, questioning whether his head was as cast iron as the rest of his prosthetics. Giselle abruptly released her hand. Their legs were revealed as she apologized, saying she shouldn't have. The girl stood with her back to the hero as she told him that if he meddled in matters that weren't his business again, he should be prepared for the consequences. The boy's eyes lit up as he realized that given the circumstances, Giselle was the most suspicious, but something didn't add up. He watched the girl tremble, wondering why she looked so frightened. The cadet watched her go, musing that Arceus Victima was only confusing. The hero sat next to Barbara. She held out a box of sandwiches, asking Luca to accept them. The young man pointed, asking why, and the girl replied that he had saved her from Kisa, and that it was a token of gratitude, and that it would be while he was at the academy. The girl blushed as she handed him the sandwiches, and asked if he minded if she cooked for him. The cadet replied that he wouldn't, as he didn't want any unnecessary misunderstandings. Barbara lowered her head. She looked down, saying that she wouldn't mind a misunderstanding. Luca looked at the girl, wondering if she really liked him, and it was still wrong. The girl was surprised to hear the question about why she was trying to get close to the guy, knowing full well it would lead to pursuit by crazy androids. She didn't care that the hero would be in danger. She replied that she didn't, wondering what she could do and not even knowing why this was happening. The young man frowned, arguing that she seemed to be good at hiding her true intentions and needed to provoke Barbara's emotions. He asked if the girl knew that Kisa had been harassing her on Giselle's orders and that Giselle wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. The cadet's eyes widened when she replied that she knew perfectly well and immediately wondered. The girl was looking at her sandwiches when the guy asked if she knew the reason for her hatred. Barbara turned to the young man, calling out. She dropped her food on the floor, asking why he would tell her. The young man stared at her, trying to figure out how Barbara would react to the provocation. He recalled the girl looking at the food. Realizing her reaction had completely confused him, she called out to him. The investigator pointed, emphasizing that they were essentially monsters in sheep's clothing. While the young man reasoned, Professor Gibbs' words flashing back to him. He recalled the girl's angry expression, declaring that Barbara was precisely such a monster. Luca watched the screen where he was informed that they had met with Kalesa's boyfriend. Jillian gestured to the side, clarifying that he was with his ex-boyfriend, and as the hero had suspected, Klesa had deliberately set him on Barbara. His family, his personality, his skills. He had never had a chance to disobey Klesa from the start. Appointing him as investigator had been the right decision. The boy stared intently at the screen, pondering the obvious, meaning Kalesa had done it for a pretext. Lucas stared at the image, wondering if he'd have the authority to investigate a suspect if he named them. The man replied that he could even name several, although if his suspicions were unfounded, it would be quite risky. The hero remarked that he was more principled than he thought, and the investigator pointed out that it wasn't that, but his case was already his sixth and a fatal one at that. Jillian crossed his fingers, saying he simply wanted to put the screws to those bastards who thought they could get away with anything. The young man was sitting on the couch when he asked if he was investigating Barbara. The man inquired if the boy suspected her because, as he'd already said, a girl from the lower sector, just a student, would be impossible for someone like that to penetrate the academy's security system and gain access to the android's control. The cadet inquired about what made him think this was possible for aristocrats. Against the backdrop of the microchips, people shook hands when Julian explained that they were a different matter. An aristocrat could intervene at the production or distribution distribution stage of androids, and there had been cases of outbidding for money or influence. The man adjusted the microphone, saying he wasn't sure if it was important, but Luca's eyes widened at the information about Barbara being sponsored by the Castoria family, imagining Giselle with her father. The hero remarked that this sounded very important, and he should think about it. The projector beamed an image. The young man leaned back, clutching his head. He sat silently, realizing that the puzzle pieces seemed about to fall into place, but they just wouldn't. The cadet rested his elbows on his knees, musing that if he could simply torture Barbara, everything would be so much simpler. But now he had to sift through all this crap, and it looked like he'd have to have a heart-to-heart with her. Luca looked ahead, clearing his head. He stood in the workshop watching the people at work, thinking about how the aristocrats still lived in perpetual competition, perhaps to curry favor with their families. Elijah had told him that the stupid nobles were forced to live quietly because they were treated like imbeciles. The hero looked ahead in surprise. The hooded girl was twisting her hand, and the young man wondered if she had a hard-working side. She wiped away her sweat while he considered that this was not a bad thing considering her in nature. The woman opened a bottle, initiating a conversation. She drank water, asking what brought him here. Giselle spat water from her mouth after he mentioned wanting to see her. The girl wiped her mouth, wondering if he'd completely lost his mind. The hero replied that, to paraphrase her, his neurons might be damaged. The woman clarified that the guy wasn't giving up, asking to get to the point because she was also busy. Luca glanced around. The hero put his hands in his pockets, suggesting they make a deal. From now on, she wouldn't hide anything from him or lie. The girl replied that it seemed someone had gotten too involved in the role. The young man was officially requesting assistance in the investigation. Giselle's expression changed, noting that she hated to mention it, but he shouldn't forget that she was the daughter of the chief centurion of the Imperial Guard. The boy remained calm, continuing to talk about how he discovered Barbara was sponsored by the Castoria family, wondering if that was why she was trying to force the girl out of the academy, wondering if he wouldn't have even bothered if the chief centurion had cared about such things. Giselle spread her legs wider, replying that she thought the fact that she'd been cursed by this girl was enough to make him hate her. They'd been friends before. The hero pulled his hand away, saying that if they were truly friends, she tried to sort out this cursed nonsense. The girl replied that they weren't that close, wondering if he was happy now. Giselle closed her eyes, listening to him explain that the Academy security forces were treating the android's quirks as deliberate malice. He was saying that for now, she was the prime suspect. The girl was furious, claiming she herself was a victim of the curse. The hero noticed how her hand was shaking, saying it was a common tactic for criminals to deflect suspicion by posing as the victim, and the girl had all the leverage to pull it off: family, knowledge, and skill. Giselle clutched her head, exclaiming that Luca had truly lost his mind, suggesting they stop investigating the matter. The young man asked her to calm down, clarifying that it wasn't as if he actually suspected her. He stared straight ahead, telling her to just let him know if she knew anything, and that was all he asked, and that he thought it was possible. The girl looked away, seeing someone's feet. Barbara was standing in the doorway, saying she was looking everywhere for the cadet. The girl was holding her bag, mentioning that he hadn't been in his usual places, and she was starting to worry. Luca tensed with anger. The heroes looked at Barbara, as the young man pondered how she'd found him, since he felt no surveillance, wondering if he'd missed anything, and he was sure he hadn't. The girl fixed her hair, as the boy reasoned that with that face, she didn't look like a victim of bullying at all, especially in front of Giselle, who was most likely the one who started it. 10 minutes. He only needed 10 minutes to figure it all out, but they weren't even letting him figure it out. The enraged cadet, trying to push away the thought of grabbing her by the throat and slamming her against the wall, shouted that her fake smile was already giving him goosebumps. Barbara was terrified, asking what the hero was saying. The girl began to cry, telling him she liked him, that the boy had saved her from Kisa. The hero clutched the object in his hand as the girl said that if he misunderstood something, she offered to discuss it. Barbara screamed in fear when an explosion occurred behind her. The young man stood his ground when Giselle asked what he was doing. The cadet was angry, saying that until now he had simply been trying to relieve boredom, but enough was enough. Luca waved his hand, noticing that the girl was treating him like an idiot. Barbara cried, standing near the aftermath of the hero's attack. She trembled as she said her name. The girl smiled maliciously, explaining that Barbara had no idea what he was talking about. Giselle crossed her arms, surprised by the sight. The girl walked toward him. She passed Giselle. Barbara threw her bag on the table. The girl raised her hand, explaining that she was leaving him something to eat, and hoped Luca would like it. The girl turned on the spot. She headed for the exit. Giselle lowered her head, trembling. Barbara placed her hand on her shoulder. The girl hugged the girl, saying she was always glad to see her. Barbara moved her face closer to hers. The girl removed her hands from Giselle. She stood in the doorway watching the couple, saying they would see each other again. The young man stood silently in the room with Giselle. She fell to the floor, not raising her head. Beads of sweat appeared on the cadet's face as he grinned. The two girls' faces were shown, as the boy explained how this all explained who the real villain was, and what this innocent relationship was all about. Luca looked at the woman's back, calling out to her. Giselle told him not to ask. The girl kept her head down, and said that the young man should just quietly finish his studies and get out of this academy. Sunlight streamed through the window as the woman sat on the floor, pleading with the hero. A call to Giselle Castoria was being processed in the system window. Luca held his hand to his ear, explaining that after that incident, the girl had been avoiding her. The young man said that he reported the incident to the captain that day, deciding it was beyond his control, but received an unexpected response. The hero kept his hands behind his back, looking at the image of James, who said he was leaving this to him to continue to act as he saw fit, as he always had. The cadet imagined Giselle's face, arguing that the guardsman would have handled handled this faster, wondering why he was pinning it all on him and simply watching from the sidelines, even though it concerned his own daughter. The boy understood that orders from his superiors were not to be questioned. The commander's hand reached out to the young man as he explained that this was the inevitable fate of a guard cadet. A pink light fell upon the hero. He stood in the center of an unknown symbol, but he was sure they had already hatched their grand plans, beyond the young man's comprehension. Luca held his hand to his ear, seeing that there was no signal, thinking how infuriating it was, frankly, even mentioning that he wasn't responding again. The protagonist recalled his conversation with Jillian, arguing that Barbara was clearly the main conspirator, but the investigator believed someone from the lower sector was incapable of manipulating the androids, wondering how Barbara had managed to gain control over them. Luca's mind flashed back to memories of the aristocrat interfering even during the production or distribution of androids and the time Barbara had burst into his and Giselle's room, hugging her, and saying she was always glad to see him. The cadet placed his hand over his face, grinning. He stood there, arguing that even if his deductions were correct, this was quite a headache, wondering how only a meeting with Giselle could confirm anything now. But how could he do that? Someone called out to him. Enrico placed his hand on Luca's shoulder, asking if he had spoken to Giselle about him. The cadet smiled, replying that of course. The young man hid behind the wall, wondering if this was his important business where the girl was telling the boy that if it came down to it, she would say something. Giselle looked at him with a serious expression, saying that she wasn't interested in him and even found him unpleasant. Enrico began to cry, hearing her plea for him to please stop hanging around her. Luca watched as the boy ran off in a hurry. Luca watched him go, thinking about how he'd make it up to Enrico later. The cadet closed his eyes as he emerged from behind the wall. He called out to her when she turned around, telling her that he was fed up. The girl looked at the hero, saying that she couldn't take it anymore and would tell her father about his insolence. The hero declared it was a lost cause. Giselle's face darkened, hearing that he had already reported her involvement. The woman spread her arms, asking what he had told her father and how much he had told him. The young man declared he had no obligation to answer to her. Giselle clutched her head in anger. She lowered her head, uttering a single word about her reputation, her position in the family, everything she had defended so far. All at once, her foot shifted forward. Giselle cried, clutching the hero's clothes, screaming that it was all his fault. If the boy hadn't interfered, this wouldn't have happened, and therefore, it was all his fault. Luca remained calm, looking at her, and said it wasn't too late to tell him everything she knew, and then he could help. Giselle begged him not to talk nonsense, because a mere cadet couldn't do anything. Tears streamed from the Gerlunk's eyes when she heard the question about what if the boy soon became part of the Castoria family. Giselle continued to hold him by the shirt, asking him what he'd said. The hero replied that appointing a noble woman to accompany him to the academy wasn't strange. The woman removed her hands from the young man when he continued, saying he was ashamed to say it himself, but he was considered a rare talent, even having a medal for military service. Most importantly, the chief centurion had noticed him. If the cadet was accepted into the Castoria family, his word would carry weight. Luca raised his palm, implying that no matter how badly she screwed up, he would support her. The girl asked if he was serious. She laughed at the mention of him needing to prove himself in this investigation to increase his chances of being adopted by the chief centurion, wondering if trust was born naturally when they shared a common goal. Didn't it? Giselle's legs trembled. The young man watched her intently. The hero grabbed the girl who was beginning to fall. He held her in his arms as she looked away. Giselle began to explain that she controlled the androids. The girl added that she had also created Barbara's curse. The arena was shown on a sunny day. A couple sat in the stands. The woman bowed her head, saying that frankly Barbara truly was her first real friend, not just a pal, but someone she was willing to open her soul to. The cadet looked at her silently, listening to her explain how 3 years ago she had become interested in someone supported by her family, and that's how they met. At first, she thought of her as a friendly, smart girl. The hero reasoned that he thought she was a cold, but it turns out she was made that way. Giselle explained that it all started with simple jealousy. The woman recalled watching her friend from the sidelines, describing how boys were actively interested in her and how Barbara was popular because of her striking appearance and smile. The girl gritted her teeth as she explained how she didn't want to share her only friend with men, realizing how foolish she'd been. Initially, she'd simply wanted to intimidate the guy out of jealousy, so she'd built an android-like robot. The robot was shown as Giselle explained how everything had led to the current situation. She kept her head down as the guy stared at her, thinking Giselle had programmed the robot with a voice card, telling him to stay away from Barbara and ordering it to follow him around at night. Blood spilled by the stairs as the young man explained how this little prank had gotten out of hand. He'd fallen and seriously fractured his skull, forcing him to drop out due to complications, and Giselle, horrified, had rushed to get rid of the robot. It was said that since a human had been injured, she couldn't escape punishment. The girl looked down, explaining that when the investigation began, the first person to realize what she'd done was Barbara, who often assembled robots in her presence. Giselle sat next to the protagonist, explaining that noticing her fear, Barbara had offered a wonderful idea. If she became a victim, no one would suspect her. Luca clarified that she had volunteered to become the second victim of the curse. The woman confirmed this was true. She had just been assigned to repair an android where she had installed the chip Barbara had given her. The robot pursued Giselle, who continued to explain that she hadn't known how it worked. But after installing the chip, the android began chasing her like a man, and so she was declared the second victim. The hero looked away, wondering aloud where Barbara's curse originated. She replied that the girl had been acting strange ever since. The woman blushed as she explained how she'd started asking people to do strange things, saying that the perfect crime required becoming a school outcast, and that the victims had to be regular. Luca looked away, realizing realizing Giselle had fallen into a trap and Barbara was manipulating her, deliberately inflating an incident that should quietly die down. The centurion's daughter crossed her arms as the boy explained that this was all to keep Giselle from disappearing. Her eyes lit up brightly. Notifications appeared, indicating that she told their secret to the boy with a picture of the girl. The girl clutched her head as voices began to whisper that Giselle was the traitor, hers and hers alone. Luca watched in surprise, wondering how she'd hacked the girl's communicator. It must have been highly secure. The pair sat watching the bright light while the hero reasoned that his instincts were screaming for him to get out of here immediately, and that the sound wasn't coming from the communicator. The young men were in the unknown's line of sight, and Luca wondered if it was the distinctive activation sound. Giselle suddenly turned to the cadet. He grabbed her in his arms, dodging the shot. The couple fell to the side. Luca stood behind a pillar, sighing. He frowned, gritting his teeth with tension. The hero was taking off his shirt. The young man began tearing the fabric with his teeth. He began wrapping it around his body. The boy pulled the knot tighter. The hero looked at the wound, gritting his teeth, thinking that this would be enough to stop the bleeding. An aerial robot was shown as the cadet considered the possibility that he had been shot down by an attack drone. If he reached maximum speed, catching the drone would be easy, but the wound in his side would only worsen. A knife was shown as the boy realized his only weapon was a pocket knife. The hero was behind cover with the girl, arguing that no one noticed because of the silencer, and that was already problematic. The cadet stared ahead, trying to push away the thought of turning the creature's face into mush. Peeking around the corner, Luca contemplated turning its face into mush. Meanwhile, Giselle was glaring menacingly at him. Noticing this, the boy was greatly surprised. Looking at her friend in fear, the black-haired girl asked if the guards didn't even feel pain, and he replied that of course he did, not understanding the stupidity of that question. At that very moment, the dragon began firing at them. The protagonist, hiding behind the barrier, mused that if only he knew the drone's exact location, everything would be different. Suddenly, Luca glanced to the side. He immediately noticed that Giselle was wearing lipstick. The black-haired girl suddenly looked up when the protagonist called out to her. Sitting directly in front of her, Luca asked if she had a mirror. A moment later, the boy tried to spot his opponent with a small mirror. Moving a little further, he spotted the drone. At that very moment, the protagonist lunged forward at incredible speed. Leaping off the ground, he threw his knife. A moment later, the weapon came directly towards the flying drone. Immediately after, it exploded, and Luca hid from the shrapnel behind a column. The boy was sitting just behind the fence, shielded from the blast. Suddenly, his eye began to sparkle, and the protagonist wondered what was wrong with the communicator. Looking directly at his girlfriend, Luca asked if the connection was working. Giselle, looking back at him fearfully, explained that the reception and transmission were being jammed. A moment later, the black-haired girl heard someone's voice asking if she had been protecting her and she had betrayed her. Then, the boy grabbed his girlfriend's hand, while the unknown voice continued to say that she liked him, bringing Giselle's hand to his ear. The protagonist listened to a voice say that he hoped he would despise her even more. Hearing this, Luca destroyed the chip in the black-haired girl's hand. After everything that had happened, Giselle cried in fear, and the boy begged her not to listen to this mad woman. Hugging the crying girl, the protagonist thought that now was not the time to speculate. Then Luca glanced away, realizing that they first needed to get to safety. Immediately after, they headed straight for the main building of the academy. Directly in front of them was the boy who had announced on the radio that he was already there. It was Felix who turned around abruptly, noticing Luca. The brown-haired boy rejoiced at his appearance, and Luca asked how he was getting his orders from above, while the latter explained that it was bad to be favored and hadn't even known about this operation. A moment later, the boys were shocked when Giselle asked if they seriously thought her father had planned all of this, to which Felix replied that the order had come from the chief captain. Hearing this, the black-haired girl trembled with fear, unable to believe that her father had simply used her as expendable material. Looking directly at Giselle, Luca reasoned that, as he'd expected, she was having a hard time accepting this. Imagining the black-haired girl as a chess piece, the boy mused that she was the chief captain's daughter, yet still an ordinary civilian, and that her father had treated her like a tool, so it was no wonder she was shaken. As she continued to cry after everything that had happened, the protagonist thought that even though she was an aristocrat, he still felt sorry for her. At that moment, Felix noticed something. Looking at Luca's wound, he asked how serious it was, and Luca wondered what could be more serious than her corpse being found tomorrow. The brown-haired boy tossed something in his direction, and said that if he said so, there was nothing he could do. While the protagonist grabbed the gun and told him not to worry about trifles, Felix asked him to take it as he couldn't move very quickly yet. Using his communicator, the brown-haired boy made contact. Suddenly his hand was destroyed just as he was about to report their location. At that very moment, Felix sharply looked away. At the same moment, Luca glared menacingly straight ahead. A moment later, the boys hid right behind the columns, peeking around the corner. The boy mused that the shot had been from close range, but he still hadn't noticed it. Meanwhile, Felix was also peeking around the corner while the protagonist mused that he didn't believe Barbara's skill level was so high that an Imperial Guard cadet hadn't noticed anything. He was utterly stunned when he heard an unknown voice asking if they could talk. Realizing it wasn't Barbara, Felix immediately signaled to his friend, while the stranger continued to insist he hadn't seriously meant to rip his head off. While the boys continued to exchange hand signals, the man declared that someone was definitely already dead. A moment later, Felix began to advance. He slowly approached the fence while Luca asked if he really knew who they were, and still wanted to talk. At that very moment, the brown-haired boy rushed forward while the stranger declared he knew perfectly well. They were cute little cadetses, and that he didn't have much time, so he suggested they get straight to the point. Giselle Castoria suddenly became frightened when the enemy declared they were to hand her over to him. Holding the black-haired girl in his hand, the protagonist asked if he really wanted to kidnap her, and demanded demand a hefty ransom. The princess simply wanted the girl, and he wasn't thrilled, but he couldn't argue with her, so he hoped at least he listened to reason. Hearing this, Luca abruptly jumped to the side preparing to shoot, and realized that Felix had been caught. At that moment, his friend looked away guilty. The enemy was holding him right by the throat. The boy was utterly stunned by the sight. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist saw the unknown figure holding his friend by the neck. It was a man in dark armor. Using his helmet, he tried to scan the surrounding area. Meanwhile, Luca hid behind a column, figuring it was a combat suit capable of completely camouflaging the body, which was why they hadn't been able to detect him. Suddenly, Giselle took her friend's hand while he was arguing that it would be difficult. Immediately after, the boy looked straight at her in surprise. Removing her hand, the protagonist explained that he would buy time, and as soon as he gave the signal, she should run and not stop. Hearing this, Giselle was terrified and was about to say something. At that moment, Luca covered her mouth with his hand and declared that there was no time to argue, and that she should do as he said. Abruptly, turning to the side, the boy began counting. At that moment, Giselle gritted her teeth in frustration as the protagonist continued counting down. Immediately after, Luca leaped from right around the corner. He fired several shots directly at the enemy clones. The boy continued firing his weapon, confused by his reaction speed. The armored man dodged the bullet, saying he himself had no desire to kill the younger ones. A moment later, the unknown man appeared directly behind the protagonist, who was pondering his opponent's words and asking if he was surprised that he was his superior in rank. Suddenly, the man in black armor kicked, telling the enemy to brace himself or he would die. Blocking his attack with his hands, Luke realized that this was no ordinary terrorist, but a retired Imperial. Staring straight at the stranger heading his way, the boy thought he should be focusing on the fight, but instead he was enjoying all this nonsense. Suddenly, the man in black armor glanced sharply to the side. His helmet scanned Giselle, who was running away. While Luca was pondering whether this man wanted to finish him off, the stranger used his camouflage ability. He kicked the ground with his foot, while the boy reasoned that he needed this so he could easily grab Giselle. The enemy was heading straight for the protagonist, while he realized that if he continued to act openly, he would surely lose. Pointing his pistol straight ahead, Luca thought he needed to think of something urgently. Staring furiously ahead, the boy told himself to make a decision quickly. A moment later, the protagonist began to process the entire environment in his mind. He began to simulate possible future scenarios in his head. Looking straight ahead, he spotted a sword lying on the ground and thought he'd borrow Felix's blade. Immediately afterward, Luca threw his pistol aside. The weapon fell directly onto the sword. This sent the blade flying, and the boy reached for it. Abruptly, grabbing the sword with his hand, the protagonist struck his opponent, blocking the opponent's thrust with his hand. The stranger claimed he'd been aiming for the sword from the start, without even looking at it. Suddenly, Luca was greatly surprised when the man in black armor asked if he was practicing Arc's Victima. At that very moment, the boy landed feet first. He swung his blade deftly, blocking the opponent's attack. A moment later, the stranger kicked him back. Taking a fighting stance, the man in black armor remarked that killing him would be a waste. Suddenly lost in thought, he claimed he was just messing around, which only made things more complicated. Meanwhile, Luca held the blade in his hands, realizing his demeanor had changed. Blood dripped right next to his leg, and the boy couldn't understand what was so special about our case victim that it made him hesitate. More importantly, he wondered if he even had a chance, and perhaps Giselle had already escaped. Staring menacingly ahead, the protagonist realized he couldn't concentrate due to his stress and that fighting such a terrorist was too difficult. Standing directly in front of his opponent, the stranger told the boy to simply retreat and not sacrifice his life on the altar of recklessness. Hearing this, Luca sighed heavily, wondering if he thought the man was playing around. Smirking slightly, the boy reasoned that, thanks to his arrogance, it was beginning to dawn on him that neither his wounds nor his identity, nor even victims' archives mattered now. Pushing off sharply with his foot, the protagonist realized the only thing that mattered. A moment later, Luca leaped straight up from the ground. Soaring into the air directly above his opponent, the boy realized that this man had truly gotten to him. Then the protagonist struck with his blade. Luca noticed that his opponent had dodged. Immediately after, the boy rushed forward again while the man in black armor remarked that such a level at his age was quite impressive, and asked if he was really willing to give his life for the Empire. At that moment, the wound on Luca's stomach suddenly opened. The boy stabbed with his blade while his opponent dodged. The blood from the wound continued to flow more and more rapidly. Staring straight ahead, the stranger asked if he really thought he wouldn't kill him. Gripping the hilt of his sword tightly, the protagonist declared that the Empire had nothing to do with it. Then Luca plunged the blade straight into the ground. Barely able to stand, the boy explained that he'd simply pissed him off so much that it was personal. The stranger standing directly in front of him laughed at this. Staring straight ahead, the man in black armor noted that this rebellious street truly didn't seem like a typical Imperial, and he sensed they would meet again, so it wouldn't hurt to introduce himself. He said his name was Rick Kaiser, and he was a Republican. Leaning on his sword, Luca asked what he meant by terrorist, and the man explained that if he insisted he could at least call him a resistance fighter. The boy grinned maliciously, noting that it sounded like. Looking thoughtfully at him, the stranger asked if he really thought so. A moment later, the man in black armor lifted his foot off the ground. He slowly approached Luca. Suddenly, the stranger jumped slightly. A moment later, the man in black armor rushed forward with incredible speed. He delivered a blow directly at the boy, destroying his mechanical arms. The stranger glared menacingly ahead through the fragments of his prosthetics. At that very moment, the protagonist was about to counter with a kick. With a deft swing of his arm, the man in black armor managed to tear it off. He held his opponent by the throat. The stranger lifted the wounded Luca above his head and said he was giving him one last chance to beg for mercy. Hearing this, the boy grinned broadly. The terrorist continued to hold his opponent by the neck. The protagonist's mouth dropped slightly. Suddenly, he pressed his lips together and spat. The man in black armor spat directly onto his helmet, declaring that if he survived, he should say hello to Kingen. The stranger jerked sharply and asked to be told he was okay, while Luca reflected that the last thing he'd heard was the snap of his neck, something you don't experience every day. Immediately after this, the narrative shifts to the Imperial Guard hospital in the capital. Felix lay in his hospital bed with a neck brace, saying it hurt. Smiling, Luca looked straight at him, saying that of course it would hurt, and asked him to stop trying to turn his head. Looking away with displeasure, the boy mused that Felix's brain had suffered serious damage from lying there too long with his neck snapped, but he'd been a little luckier. Recalling the moment Giselle had rushed to his aid, the protagonist reflected that 4 guards had arrived almost immediately after his fall along with Castoria. If they hadn't immediately helped him, he would have shared Felix's fate. At that moment, someone opened the door to the room. It was him, waving his hand dismissively as he asked him to get up and lie down as comfortably as he could. Then the head of the Castoria family sat down next to the protagonist's bed. The commander of the Imperial Guard glared menacingly ahead. Looking at his friend, Luca declared that Soldier Felix had fulfilled his duty to the end. While the boy stared sternly ahead, Hamilas remarked that he would like to hear a report. The narrative then shifted to a moment when a dark sky had already appeared over the hospital. From his bed, the protagonist finished his account of what had happened, imagining the man in black armor in his mind. The head of the Castoria clan explained that Rick Kaiser's real name was Rick Silva Nuns, and he was one of the 5 most wanted criminals in the Empire. Looking directly at his commander, Luca remarked that he never heard of him before, and the commander explained that they wrote about all fugitives in the newspapers, especially if they were involved in the Empire's shady dealings. Deeply surprised by what he heard, the boy realized that the glorious and impeccable Empire was indeed guilty of shady dealings. Looking directly at the commander-in-chief of the Imperial Guard, the protagonist thought that he was more than just a terrorist, and the commander concluded that it would be right to reveal all the details of the operation. Imagining a girl under a mechanical sight, Hamill explained that Operation Juliet had been planned for 5 years, and the goal was to infiltrate the ranks of the anti-imperial terrorist group Retribution. Staring dumbfoundedly at Dom Castoria, Luca asked if they really only needed to infiltrate and not destroy them. He's explained that Retribution was a strictly isolated organization and standard methods didn't work there because no matter how many branches you cut, they still grow back, and unless the core was destroyed, everything was useless. While he was asking, the operation had failed since they hadn't captured Rick. Smiling broadly after hearing this, the Imperial Guard commander concluded that the plan had been successfully executed and their agent had infiltrated Retribution, but the boy asked for more specifics. A moment later, the protagonist was greatly shocked when he revealed that Barbara was their agent and that the organization had hired her as a hacker. Listening to all this, Luca clutched his cot, unable to believe that the madwoman was on their side, while the head of House Castoria explained how they'd been monitoring her for a long time, trying to attract the enemy's attention, and it had finally paid off, though he honestly hadn't expected her to seem so crazy. Imagining Felix, Kiso, Jillian, and Giselle in his head, the boy wondered, what about the people who had to be sacrificed for the operation? Felix, whose brain was damaged, Jillian, who wasted time pursuing a false target, and even the Centurion's daughter, whom Barbara had been tormenting all this time. All mere pawns, expendable. Staring menacingly straight ahead, the commander of the Imperial Guard answered the question of whether he already knew about this, that he knew nothing at all, and it would be better if she never found out. With a look full of seriousness, Gemellis asked if he understood why he was telling all this. Suddenly frozen in place, Luca considered that all that remained for him was destruction. No achievements, nothing more, just a miserable end. A moment later, the boy was utterly stunned when a holographic window appeared right in front of him, and Castoria asked him to read and sign. Seeing this, the protagonist smiled slightly. Holding out the adoption certificate, the Imperial Guard commander welcomed Luca to the Castoria family. The robot unscrewed the prosthetic from Luca's back. He deliberately threw nails right onto the table. Meanwhile, the boy recalled his words, saying that the paperwork would take some time, and that there were simply a couple of stubborn, old men in the family. Removing the prosthetic from the protagonist's back, the android said he would feel pain and discomfort in the area for the time being. Immediately after, Luca threw on his jacket and left the room, and Felix asked where he was going. Awkwardly scratching the back of his head, the boy explained that he had to go. Watching his friend go, the brown-haired boy wished him luck. Hearing this, the protagonist nodded approvingly. A moment later, the door slammed behind him. The story's narrative shifted to the guard's academy, where Luca was walking down the hallway. He saw system alerts about Barbara right in front of him. Imagining the red-haired girl in his head, the boy mused that she was a rather dubious figure, a spy deliberately planted by the Empire and the terrorist group Retribution. Remembering how she had bullied Giselle, the protagonist reasoned that he wasn't sure whether her madness was real or just part of the game, and that she was definitely a personal character, wondering if she had truly been assigned this mission from the start. Suddenly, Luca stopped in his tracks. Lowering his head slightly, he wondered if it was all just a coincidence. Remembering his childhood self fighting the boy reflected on his rise from the lower sector orphanage and meeting Quinuan to study victims' arcase. Visualizing his teacher and the battle against Rick, the protagonist wondered if those mysterious events at the academy had led to him acting of his own free will and choice. Recalling all the events that had recently occurred, Luca wondered if he hadn't overcome all the hardships of life and the circumstances of his birth through his own efforts alone. Realizing all this, the boy bit his lip in dissatisfaction. Then he slowly walked forward, telling himself to stop doubting. Walking down the hallway, the protagonist mused that it was simply a delusion, and the captain had opened up to him, but perhaps it was merely a test of his loyalty. Immediately afterward, Luca clenched his fist, realizing he couldn't give up now. Stopping right in front of the door, the boy understood that this was a rare chance to change his life. When the door opened, Kinwan looked straight ahead, hoping he managed to enjoy his youth at the academy. Standing directly before his instructor, the protagonist declared that he hadn't even had time to properly train, so enjoying himself was out of the question. While the instructor remarked that he felt sorry for Felix, who looked very unlucky. Holding out a mug of tea toward Luca, Kinwan declared that he had been an outstanding trainee. Looking directly at the green tea in the mug, the boy wondered if this could be considered mere bad luck. Then the protagonist took a sip of the drink. Envisioning Rick in armor, Lucas said a man by that name had asked him to say hello, and that he was doing well. Raising a cup of tea to his lips, the instructor said he was glad to hear he was okay, and never thought he'd become a terrorist. Looking directly at his teacher, the boy remarked that it sounded like they were close, and Rick replied that Rick had been his comrade during his internship, and had incredibly fast reflexes. So frankly, he was surprised he'd survived the encounter, until Rick asked if they were still in touch. Looking directly at his student, Kinwan pleaded not to misunderstand, and explained that he might be retired, but he was still on the Empire's payroll, so there was no need for him to communicate with the terrorist, suggesting that he didn't seem to have told his comrade, the chief centurion, about this. Still sitting at the same table with Luca, he asked why he shouldn't first share his doubts with the leadership, if he had any. The protagonist explained that it was because such things could lead to execution on the spot, and he needed to at least make sure before reporting, while the protagonist replied that if he could be executed for such a thing, it would have happened long ago. Fixing his menacing gaze forward, the instructor asked the dear good boy the real reason for his consideration. Hearing this, Luca, holding a cup of tea, asked the true meaning of Arch's victima. After his words, Kinwan, his gaze full of seriousness, inquired why he was asking. Looking down, the boy explained that the Empire, it turned out, kept records of everyone who mastered this style, and that was why Rick hadn't crushed his head and left him alive. After these words, the protagonist's hand began to tremble with fear. At that moment, the instructor took a sip of tea, smiling slightly. Kinwan said that Luca Castoria had grasped this faster than he expected. Looking directly at his student, the retired soldier explained that for a small fry, he knew surprisingly much, and asked if he understood what that meant, to which the boy replied that he understood perfectly well. Smiling broadly, Kimun explained that around 200 years ago, around 3518, the first uprising against the Empire had occurred. Visualizing a man in his mind, the instructor explained that it had been led by none other than the Emperor's first advisor, Noel Maliska, who had made a significant contribution to the creation of the Empire, developing numerous combat theories, including projectile control tactics and methods of combat with cybernetic prosthetics. Visualizing a vast array of mechanical armor, the retired soldier explained that Noel understood that a full-scale war with the Imperial army was doomed to failure, so he had chosen guerrilla tactics. Recalling how to engage his brain during battle, Kinwan claimed that this was the stage where victims' arcs emerged. He then imagined himself looking directly at Noel's image, and explained that it was also known as the arc's fighting style. After listening to his teacher, Luca was utterly stunned, wondering what it meant that of all the possible fighting techniques, he had mastered the rebel technique. Immediately afterward, the instructor visualized in his mind a battle between terrorists and Imperials, and explained how, with its help, resistance fighters had successfully resisted the Empire for many years, and only those who could master this style could lead guerrilla units and inevitably participate in local battles. Staring straight ahead in amazement as he listened to his mentor, the boy mused that this explained a lot, and if this was the leading fighting technique of the guerrillas, it had almost no weaknesses. Looking directly at Kinwan, who sat in front of him, the protagonist explained that given that they were all risking their lives one way or another, the mental consequences weren't particularly concerning. The irregular army boasted neither formations nor standards, meaning they needed a flexible style that could be applied to any unpredictable situation, as long as he could confirm everything was correct. Imagining a man hiding behind cover from his enemies, the instructor explained that even during large-scale purges, Noel and his men always found a way to survive. Visualizing a map of the terrain with various arrival points, the retired soldier explained that they were dispersed throughout the Empire, gathering pashik, which they used to strike key targets. Imagining a lizard discarding its wounded tail, Kinwan added that if they were exposed, it didn't matter, and the unneeded tail was simply discarded like a lizard's, while the resistance continued. Recalling their walk down the streets of the lower sector, the protagonist reasoned that a picture was now forming in his mind. The rebels were disguised as ordinary civilians, and since their prosthetics weren't designed for combat, no one suspected their involvement in the resistance. Visualizing the bloody sign in his mind, Luca reflected on the new Arcus Victima users who could fight equally well even without high-tech prosthetics, and even if they were accidentally interrogated, they had nothing to present. So Rick let him live. Remembering the man in black armor holding him by the neck, the boy wondered if this was precisely why the Empire kept strict records of those who practiced this fighting style. Looking directly at his teacher, the protagonist asked how the Empire had gotten rid of the rebels back then, and the teacher replied that they simply killed anyone who seemed even slightly suspicious. Hearing this, Luca was utterly stunned. Recalling the battlefield strewn with corpses, Kinyuan explained that they no longer distinguished between civilians and rebels, so some regions were simply slaughtered. Imagining blood flowing down the shattered wall, the instructor added that due to such extreme measures, even users of our case victim couldn't avoid death, but they still allowed the rebellion to be suppressed. Sitting directly in front of the retired soldier, the boy asked if this was the hidden part of the Empire's history, and the teacher replied that it wasn't hidden, but there was no point in including it in textbooks because without delving into history you'll never know the truth. After his words, the protagonist imagined Noel Muisk, once a benefactor of the Empire and later a traitor, visualizing the battlefield strewn with corpses. Luca mused that the Empire had committed massacre. Then the boy remembered his teacher who used all his brainpower during battle, and he thought there was also a guard instructor who mastered partisan combat techniques. Staring menacingly straight ahead, the protagonist declared that he was leaving. The Centurion had sent him because he suspected ties to a terrorist organization. Hearing this, Kinyuan remained silent in his seat, casting a massive shadow. A moment later, the instructor began clapping his hands, declaring it was all correct. With a small smile on his face, the retired soldier said he needed to find and present evidence of his connection to retribution. Throwing his arms outstretched, Kinyuan added that only then would he quickly advance in his career. Staring ahead with a fearful gaze after hearing everything, Luca declared that he didn't believe he was collaborating with terrorists and couldn't understand why he was acting like this. Meanwhile, the instructor, with a slight smile on his face, declared that it made no difference whether he believed it or not. The main thing was that the Centurion believed it, saying he would give him a small clue about investigating his past in the lower sector. Staring ahead with a serious gaze, the retired soldier added that this would help him advance, while the young man pondered how he could remain so calm when he was suspected of collaborating with terrorists. Sitting in his seat, the protagonist recalled the image of him and wondered what about the chief Centurion, how much he knew, and whether he could have sent him to spy on Kinyuan, already knowing everything in detail. Rising from his seat, Luca declared that he would certainly report everything he'd heard today to the chief Centurion. Watching his departing student go, the instructor promised that they would see each other again. A moment later, the boy was gone and the door slammed behind him. Immediately after, the protagonist ran forward at breakneck speed. He ran straight through the outer sector. After a while, he managed to escape quite far. Then Luca hid just around the corner, gritting his teeth in frustration. The boy declared that they were tired of looking down on him, imagining Hamalas and Quinyuan between them. The protagonist reflected that to them. He was nothing more than tools with which they tested each other's intentions, and he couldn't understand how much longer he had to walk through this minefield where any false move meant certain death. Visualizing his instructor's menacing gaze, Luca reasoned that it was becoming increasingly difficult to read, and he couldn't even comprehend who he was. Staring straight at the system notification window, which had found no information on No Musk, the boy thought that the available sources of information would yield nothing anyway, but he wasn't going to be a simple puppet. Then, the protagonist scraped metal off the wall with his hand, saying that if he wanted to understand anything, he'd have to follow his advice. Realizing this, Luca glared menacingly ahead. Imagining a huge door leading to the lower sector, the boy thought he needed to go there to trace his teacher's past. Imagining the faces of Jamias and Kinyuan, Luke amused that the guard commander had sent him to his instructor because they thought he was in league with terrorists, and yet he himself was completely calm despite being aware of these suspicions. Recalling his teacher's words about the hint, the boy reasoned that he told him something back then, and he couldn't understand what anyone was even thinking when they said such things. Visualizing himself right in the palm of the retired soldier's hand, the protagonist wondered if he really wanted to lure him to the lower sector and eliminate him and get rid of him with the power of resistance, retribution. Imagining Quinyuan looking at him like a chess piece, Luca wondered if perhaps this was all a conspiracy between him and the guard's leadership designed to test him. Scanning the street of the lower sector, the boy realized he'd already decided he wouldn't hesitate, and it was too late to retreat, so he had to do everything possible to track Kinyuan down, scratching the metal with his fingers. The protagonist reasoned that he wouldn't be rid of him so easily, and he had to be prepared for anything. Standing right there in the chief captain's office, Luca considered the first step, reporting the exchange between himself and the instructor, claiming that Kinyuan was openly provoking them. Hearing this, Hamilas, his stern gaze fixed ahead, declared that Rick Silva nuns had also carried out unofficial orders while serving with him, so a connection between them was entirely possible. He also asked if he himself wasn't curious, given that the suspicious Kinguin had simply been left unsupervised until their time. With a serious expression, Luca declared that if there were reasons he shouldn't know, he would simply cover his ears. After his words, the Imperial Guard commander raised his head slightly. Looking menacingly straight ahead, the chief captain explained that he was telling him this precisely because he trusted him. Imagining Kinyuan conversing with the terrorists, Himmler explained that this investigation was ordered from above, not just by the guard, and that these people believe they could get to the core of the retribution criminal group through the instructor, and they must be considering the possibility of his collusion with Rick. Surprised by everything he'd heard, the boy asked why they'd given such a suspicious man the important role of instructor, to which the Imperial Guard commander replied that he'd wanted it that way, and said he'd leave the service if they didn't give him the role, and that he was quite competent in it. Sitting right behind his desk, the commander-in-chief asked if his curiosity had been satisfied. Hearing this, the protagonist swallowed in fear. Bowing his head, Lucas stated that he had spent a lot of time with Kinyuan, but frankly hadn't noticed anything suspicious. He was quite meticulous and never revealed his true intentions. Staring sternly ahead, Hamalis asked him to stop making excuses and do what he could, as he was the only one fit for the role. Over the past 10 years, many other cadets had been sent to him, but none had yet gotten as close as he had. Spreading his arms, the Imperial Guard commander remarked that the instructor clearly liked him. Hearing this, the boy clasped his hand tightly behind his back. Then he raised his head slightly, staring menacingly ahead. The protagonist then asked for authority beyond that of a mere cadet. Immediately after this, the narrative shifts to a moment when a space shuttle was flying directly over the wasteland. Inside, Luca was with the chief advisor. He's looking straight ahead, asked if he was nervous. Looking back, the boy replied that he'd be lying if he said he wasn't nervous and was in fact a little nervous. Looking back, the boy replied that he'd be lying if he said he wasn't nervous and was in fact a little nervous. Then the protagonist abruptly looked away, wondering what he told the captain exactly what kind of authority he needed. Visualizing a security card in his head, Luca reasoned that he needed clear passage between the upper and lower sectors. Visualizing melee and ranged weapons, the boy figured he'd also need permission to carry a personal weapon and some funds for the investigation itself. Recalling the system authorization window, the protagonist mused that he also needed access to the database, which was granted only to the highest ranks, and frankly, he simply couldn't ask for more. Visualizing his own smoldering photograph in his mind, Luca thought that while this wasn't enough, he was in a position where he could be expended at any moment, so he had to do everything possible. At the same time, he recalled how, with a worried expression on his face, he'd said that this wasn't what a soldier should say, but he didn't want to die because of such a dreary mission, especially since he'd learned too much. Resting his head on his hand, the chief centurion said he would be honest, and if ordered by his superiors, he would erase evidence of this mission without a lead, even if it meant eliminating witnesses. Then Hemla smiled slightly, adding that he could only promise a message that he would do everything within his power for him. Holding out the family card in front of him, the commander of the Imperial Guard declared that this was precisely why he had accepted him into the family. Suddenly, the narrative shifts to the present, where Luca holds that very same family membership card in his hands. Tucking it into his inner pocket, the boy mused that his life was now entirely in the hands of the chief captain until the latter suddenly declared that he himself wasn't a fan of such formalities. Smiling broadly, the Imperial Guard commander explained that since they were family, they should at least introduce him to his new relatives, and the boy said that if they had any wishes for his behavior in front of them, he would certainly fulfill them. Hearing this, Amila suddenly became thoughtful. Looking directly at his adopted son, the Imperial Guard commander declared that he should behave as he always did, because he thought it would even serve as an incentive for his children, which was quite surprising. Sitting right there in the spaceship, the protagonist reflected that he had no idea what he was thinking, and it seemed that to secure the necessary support, he simply needed to overcome it. Suddenly, Luca looked straight out the window as his adoptive father announced they were almost there. A moment later, the space shuttle was approaching the landing site. Looking menacingly to the side, the chief captain remarked that he still didn't think of this place as home. Immediately after, the spacecraft began to land. Looking directly at the vast estate belonging to his family, Jame added that he had even spent his entire childhood there. A moment later, the space shuttle began to land. The interior of the estate was decorated with a huge number of coats of arms. Luca was right in his room, looking straight out the window. Standing there, the boy recalled Jamea's words, asking him to enter the estate and rest for now, as his room was surely already prepared, and he would be introduced to everyone a little later. The protagonist stared straight out the window of his room and simply remained silent. He saw the image of the Imperial Guard's commander-in-chief speaking to his servants, and he reflected on how everyone fawned over the head of the household, and the mere thought of standing there made him numb. Continuing to observe everything from his room, Luca reflected on how he was still no different from the commoners of the lower sector, bowing to those in power, and wondered if this was the life he so desperately desired. Suddenly, the boy glanced at the door where a knock had come from. A moment later, someone entered his room and asked what it meant that he had truly become part of the Castoria family. Looking straight ahead, the protagonist saw that it was Giselle. Standing directly in front of Luca, the black-haired girl declared that she owed him an apology for her unseemly behavior last time, overcome with emotion. Though even this was merely an excuse, and that was behavior unbecoming of a true member of the Castoria family. Looking straight ahead, the boy told her to stop, explaining that it was normal for civilians to behave like that in such a situation. Recalling the image of Felix, Giselle recounted visiting him, but it seemed he didn't recognize her. Looking directly at his half-sister, the protagonist declared that gratitude was good, but there was no need to beat himself up over what had happened since Felix was doing his duty as a guard. The black-haired girl asked if he really wanted to console her, to which he replied that he was simply stating the matter and wasn't that sentimental. Hearing this, Giselle smiled, noting that he was like a blue flame. Looking happily ahead, the black-haired girl added that, however, it burned hotter and more fiercely than any other flame, while Luca noted that she had become softer than before, as if she had lost her thorns. Suddenly, the boy was greatly surprised when Giselle asked if he remembered what he had said that time. With obvious worry on her face, the black-haired girl asked if he would support her now that he had become part of the Castoria family. Smiling broadly at her words, the protagonist declared he hadn't lied, and it seemed they could now discuss the details, discussing what he liked. After all, that's exactly what a noble lady of the Empire should be, one who understands the principles of give and take. Abruptly turning her back on him, Giselle was about to share some information with him as payment for what had happened. Opening the system hologram, the black-haired girl said she was sure her father didn't tell him much and wasn't the type to worry about every little detail. Showing images of two men, Giselle declared that he should be most wary of his two older brothers, his first and second sons. Standing directly in front of her half-brother, the black-haired girl declared that his appearance would most likely cause them significant stress, and Luca pointed out that he was simply an adopted son, to which she countered that this wasn't true since no matter what anyone said, Castoria was a military family. Imagining the two brothers against the backdrop of the protagonist, Giselle explained that while both the first and second sons weren't up to the role of family head, he as an elite soldier wouldn't have such problems. So, even without blood ties, he posed a serious threat. Suddenly, the black-haired girl was surprised when Luca said that if such a possibility existed, they would naturally be concerned, and I suppose that was understandable. A moment later, she became terrified when the boy asked, "What about her?" With a smile on his face, the protagonist inquired if she didn't have any ambitions to lead the family, and Giselle replied that she didn't think it was any of his business. Clenching her hand in frustration, the black-haired girl listened to the protagonist's words, saying that he certainly had no intention of becoming the head of the family, but if he was threatened, he wouldn't sit idly by, and what happened next was none of his concern. Looking directly at his half-sister, Luca told her that if the opportunity presented itself, she should take it. Smiling broadly, the boy added that this was advice from his brother. Giselle was very surprised after hearing all this. After a moment, she grinned. Then, the black-haired girl began to laugh loudly. Covering her face with her hand, Giselle asked if he would support her if the opportunity presented itself, pointing his hand forward. Luca promised that as long as she didn't become his enemy, he would help. Then, the two shook hands, and the black-haired girl said they had agreed to be allies back then, so she was counting on her older brother. Looking straight ahead, she noted that this was the first and last time she would call him that. Smiling broadly, the boy remarked that this was a good thing since he himself disliked the strange nickname. At that moment, the clock struck the hour. Luca and Giselle shook hands. A moment later, the story shifted to the dining hall. The black-haired girl and the boy walked inside. The protagonist stared menacingly ahead, looking straight at the people at the table. Luca noticed Jupi, the second son of the Castoria family, Nicholas, the first son, and Eva, the wife of the head of the Castoria family, sitting there with a broad smile. The purple-haired woman asked what he, Luca, meant, noting she'd heard a lot about him. Looking straight ahead after hearing this, the boy mused that it was obvious, as he supposed that she didn't like him. Sitting at his place at the table, Eva asked them to sit down, saying that the head of the house would be arriving soon, and the boy told his mother he understood everything. At that moment, Giselle whispered in his ear to be careful and not give them any reason, as his father wasn't the type to stand up for him. A moment later, the door to the dining room opened. The boys turned sharply, seeing a man standing there. It was Himas, who with a serious expression suggested they begin their meal. A voice rang out from right at the dinner table addressing the protector of humanity, the father of the nation, the first emperor of their country. Amelas, his hand on his chest, praised his majesty Denoa. Immediately afterward, the entire family began to eat. Luca and Giselle also began to eat, sitting together at the table. Suddenly, the boy glared menacingly ahead. Looking at the people seated at the table, the protagonist reflected that, as expected, all eyes were on him. Then the narrative shifted to a few minutes earlier when Luca was walking down the hallway with Giselle, saying that the fact that the two were wary of him only meant they were eyeing the position of head of the family. Looking straight at him, the black-haired girl noted that this was true, and most likely they had already gathered all possible information about him. Imagining the smiling eldest son, Nicholas, Giselle explained that he had rejected high-tech prosthetics, meaning his path lay through bureaucracy, but he was smart and had already established connections with the right people and vassals. Visualizing the second son, Jupi, the black-haired girl said he couldn't boast of any particular talents, but was a soldier, and hoped that this would help him lead the family. And frankly, the conservatives in their family were on his side. Looking directly at his half-sister, Luca concluded that his existence was merely a hindrance, and she replied that it was precisely so, and they would certainly try to humiliate him when they met. Namely, they would pick on his past, his behavior, and anything else. Returning to the present, with the boy sitting at the table, he reflected that it was now clear why they were watching so closely. Sitting at the table, the protagonist recalled the words of his adoptive father and sister, and thought that while he knew the basics of etiquette, it seemed expected something entirely different. Immediately afterward, Luca began cutting off a piece of meat. Bringing it to his mouth, the boy agreed with the chief centurion. Looking directly at his adoptive father, the protagonist was about to see if he would live up to his expectations. A moment later, Giselle was startled by a strange sound. At that very moment, Luca shoved a huge piece of meat into his mouth. Noticing this, Jupi grinned slightly and turned to him. Hearing this, the boy raised his head in displeasure. Looking directly at his stepbrother, the protagonist asked him what he wanted, and he explained that he hadn't meant to start with that. With a smug look, the second son declared that he had to point out his table manners, unaware of how he'd been raised. At least there should be some boundaries. Hearing this, Luca thought he'd fallen for it easily and hadn't even realized it was a game, dismissing him as a typical worthless idiot. Looking at Nicholas sitting next to him, the boy mused that he was clearly irritated by the fact that he had all the makings of an elite soldier. The first son, however, wasn't sure he'd seen through his game, but he didn't intervene because he thought they were simply dividing the conservative support. Looking at the sly grin on Nicholas's face, the protagonist realized that it looked like he would be the real enemy. Rising from his seat, Jupi explained that even if his father had acknowledged him, such behavior wasn't customary in the Castoria family. Luca responded that he thought it was because even someone like him was better than him, someone who had served the Empire for 10 years and still hadn't earned a medal. Looking straight ahead, the boy added that from the Castoria family's point of view, this was a fact, while the others began to laugh. Hearing this, the second son gritted his teeth in displeasure. Sitting right behind his seat, the protagonist asked why they couldn't pasteurize in real combat rather than in this notorious etiquette of theirs. After all, he had trained under a distinguished commander. After his words, Jupi grabbed his knife and asked how he dared speak like that. At that moment, Nicholas intervened, telling Luca to stop teasing his brother and telling Luca to cool it. Looking at his older brother, the second son explained that he was only trying to instruct him as an elder. A moment later, Jupi was taken aback when he was told he knew perfectly well how to behave at the table. Looking directly at the boy who was carefully cutting a piece of meat with a knife, Nicholas explained that he was just playing around and asked him if that was true. Immediately afterward, the protagonist took a small piece of meat into his mouth. Dexterously wielding the cutlery, Luca apologized, claiming it was his mistake. Looking sternly ahead, the boy explained that he was simply a little nervous. After all, it was his first time at such a large family gathering. After everything that had happened, Jupi was quite angry. Looking directly at his younger brother, the first son said he'd heard he'd received a 7th rank medal in the form of a sword hilt. He wasn't a fighter himself, but as far as he knew, it was quite a significant achievement for a cadet. The protagonist replied that it was the most common medal among guardsmen, so it wasn't anything to be proud of. At that moment, Jupi slammed his fist down on the table in displeasure, while Nicholas declared that he'd always felt a little ashamed in front of his father for not becoming a soldier. But now that Luca had taken on that burden, he felt relieved. Clenching his fist, Jupi asked his brother if he'd really ridden him off. Bringing his fork straight to his mouth, the older brother explained he'd misunderstood and asked if he thought his brother, his own brother, didn't know what his younger brother was capable of and had no doubts about his future achievements. The second son, his head bowed slightly, noticed that this weighed on him as well. That's it for now. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. Let me know your thoughts of this manhwa through comment section.